This is RHEL Presents, and we've got a special mini-series for you. We're going to be talking about how to get up and running with Red Hat Satellite. And joining me for the entire mini-series is my buddy, Richard Rios. Welcome to RHEL Presents, my buddy.
Hello, everyone. Just glad to be here. Little light effects here. Just happy to be here. Went all red, being satellite, even a satellite shirt. Match the occasion. I have been working with satellite since version 5, otherwise known as Spacewalk. But this is the new and improved and much mature version of satellite.
Yeah, so Richard, why don't you introduce yourself real quick? Tell folks what you do here at Red Hat, and maybe throw in something you do on the side for fun.
This is my 10th year with Red Hat. Time has flown by. I am a solutions architect. I've worn multiple hats, no pun intended, behind me. Been mainly in the role of solutions architect for the commercial mid-market space, regionally as well. And one of the areas that I must say I had a calling for was the actual infrastructure components, virtualization, the OS, maintaining setup, setting up standards, so those kinds of things. So it really, I fell in love with satellite from the very beginning because what its capabilities and how it could really impact it's just admins or infrastructures day-to-day going on, just because I spend those countless hours and weekends just beating my head trying to figure things out from what I inherited. And satellite just makes that so much easier. Having a content management engine really just changed my life in that respect.
Yeah, Red Hat Satellite is an amazing tool, and I too used it back in the Spacewalk days. When we say Spacewalk, by the way, folks, what we're talking about is that Spacewalk used to be the upstream of Red Hat Satellite, so it would be developed under 5, and it would be developed and worked on upstream, and then it would be productized as Red Hat Satellites. And then with Satellite 6, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but with Satellite 6, it was rebuilt on a few other tools, and we'll talk about all of that a little bit later in the mini-series. Why don't, 5 minutes in, we share my screen, and let's get into some stuff here. So a little bit of background. What we are running is, this is just a vanilla RHEL 8.10 virtual machine here in my home lab. As you can see, I've got it registered. I'm using simple content access. And then to show there's nothing up my sleeve, I can't talk and type, I'm going to do a DNF update. We're going to, at least as of an hour ago, I didn't have any new packages. Hopefully DNF doesn't prove me wrong. But we're going to make sure we've got all the packages registered. In fact, Rios mentioned a good point before the show to go in and make sure that we've got all the necessary repositories here. Richard, you were talking during pre-show about the importance of making sure that you met all the requirements. Now, I've shown a few, but you wanted to hang out in particular?
Well, with the latest builds for satellite, I believe we're on version way past 6.11 now, right? You need to have a RHEL 8 system. As a matter of fact, the majority of the time, you want to think, I want to patch this system within an inch of its life. So it has to be current, but you always want to verify that the version of satellite you have is going to match what you have. And also, how long is that server going to live? Is it going to live for, is this a test environment you're going to rebuild soon? Is this going to live for a year? Or is it going to be years of life? And if you're thinking years, well, how many OS versions is it going to support? Am I going to be supporting just RHEL 8 or 9? Or are you doing, I'm doing 7, 8, 9, and every version in between, and every single package is available. So all of those will take up some space, just because it is a content management engine, and it's going to hold it in your var log, in your var. So always make sure you have sufficient space, or you've configured your file system to allow you to expand that easily, because you'll have the space for pulp, for example, which can take quite a bit of space on that area. Right. That was I'm speaking from past experience.
Well, we won't tell the audience how, when I was prepping for this mini-series, when I built out this virtual machine, I just gave it my standard 32 gig QCOW2 file and said, have at it, and then realized, wait a minute, that's not going to work out well. So yeah, varlog, recommended 10 gigs,
Mm-hmm.
PG SQL recommended around 20 gigs. Kind of minimal recommendations for pulp is 300 gigs. And then,
Think bigger.
I've got that. Yeah, probably bigger depending on how many versions
Yeah.
of RHEL you're going to be supporting. If there's a lot of third-party repositories like Apple that you may be pulling in, and then my 28 gigs of that 32 gig original disk. So I've actually got two virtual disks on this system.
To give you an idea, so at one point I was tasked to maintain the internal satellite server that we use for our demo environment that all solutions architects could use. I started at 300, and because everybody would use it for either self-training or demo purposes, I ended up growing that to a terabyte just because I kept getting, can we get more space, or it was running out of space. So yes, I was thinking people are going to experiment and try things. Yeah, terabyte is where I ended up. So I'm not saying everybody needs to get a terabyte for it, but uh, space will be consumed easily.
Well, and luckily you don't have to guess at this. There is an
Yeah.
incredible installation guide out on our website. If you check out the description below after the show, we'll have a link there. And in fact, I think like the entire first chapter is just prereqs, what version of the
Mhm.
operating system, how you should configure certain aspects of it, and then like the disk layout that we just kind of talked through.
Spending becoming very well acquainted with it becomes really important.
Yes, it
Or
does.
that's not even speaking to if you ever had to rebuild a satellite. Like you had a test environment and you were rebuilding it from scratch, and there are some other things that could happen in that space. Right, Eric?
Yeah, well, I'll tell that story here in a bit. But
Okay.
so the installation process is going to take some time. So why don't we dive
Yep.
in here to our virtual machine and let's get some things
Mhm.
going, and we can kind of chat as we wait for certain pieces of it to load. So
Perfect.
we've got a lot of the preliminaries taken care of. So I want to do a DNF repo list, and this will tell me what repositories are actually enabled and configured for my RHEL 8 box here. So we've got the BIOS OS and the AppStream repositories. And then I goofed. So what I was going to show you was that we then need to go in and enable the two satellite repositories. So we're
Hmm.
going to install satellite 6.15 and satellite maintenance 6.15 as well.
Hmm.
And so to do that, we would do a subscription manager command, and we'd want to enable those two repositories. Of course, this command will complete without any errors because it's already configured. Then after that, we'll be able to do a DNF module enable. So if you're familiar with app streams and the concept of modules, it's basically an easier way to pick which packages and what versions you get installed on your system. So in this
Hmm.
case, I'm going to do a module enable on satellite for EL8 since we're using Red Hat
Yes.
Enterprise Linux 8. I'm going to go ahead and enable that. You'll see me using the TAC Y flag a number of times just because I hate trying to do something and then realizing that it hasn't moved because it's asking me if I'm sure. So that's why
Right.
we're using the TAC Y flag there. And so now it's enabling streams for PKI, PostgreSQL, Ruby, satellite, and satellite maintenance. Because patching usually found a way to bite me as when I was a systems administrator, I use the following command liberally. DNF clean all cleans out that cache of
Yep.
metadata and information. So I tend to run it before I do any patching. Anytime I change any repository settings, basically when you're doing a patching operation, when in doubt, clean the cache. So I do a DNF clean all. All it means is the next time you go to do a DNF operation, it'll take a little bit longer as it's pulling down all that metadata, but it will be fresh and will tend not to run into too many issues there.
No, that is a great point. Having a clean, stable environment is really important.
All right, I will tell that story, but while I'm telling that story, I'm going to go ahead and kick off the
Yeah.
first big operation here. We're going to do a DNF install on satellite, and because we're live on the air, I'm going to go ahead and let that run for a bit. So as you can tell, it's taking a little bit of time there to pull in all the metadata from the 4 repos that we have enabled. So while that's running, Richard had no end of jokes to make yesterday. We were preparing for this episode. I was doing some practice runs to make sure all the commands were correct, make sure that while we're live on air, I could copy and paste out of my notes, because we've run into that issue on Into the Terminal where where copy and paste doesn't work because your text editor or something decides that it wants to turn 2 hyphens into 1 long hyphen, which then of course the bash terminal goes, I don't know what that is.
Right.
So I was paranoid and decided to run through the process again. And I got Satellite installed. I got it configured. All the services were running. The disks were laid out correctly. var log was writing as it should. SE Linux and Firewall were running. I felt really good about the prep that I'd done, about my own experience installing Satellite as a sysadmin. And around that time, I get a Slack message from Richard. Hey, how's it going? It's like, well, having this weird issue. I cannot get the Satellite web interface to load. I don't know what it is. It's complaining about an SSL error. It's not DNS, even though it usually is DNS. It wasn't DNS. So 10 or 15 minutes of me beating my head against the keyboard and Richard sending me ideas about, well, what about this or what about that? And it's like, well, no, that's not it either. And I disabled the firewall, still not working. Out that Firefox had its best intentions and was trying to protect me from a potential SSL cert swap. It said, well, the signature on the SSL cert that I have versus the one in my cache doesn't match up. So I went in and I told Firefox, forget that old SSL cert. So because I was using the same host name, the Satellite console wouldn't load because Firefox was like, no, that's a different cert. It doesn't work.
It's thinking man in the middle attacking your house.
What I wanted to tell Firefox was, no, that wasn't the case. This is just like the 6th time that I've rebuilt the Satellite server to make sure that everything's working.
You did those are not the certs you're looking for.
Yeah. So we are carrying out an operation that's going to install 418 packages, and we're at 72. So I've got some questions that I can share with. And the first one is, what is Satellite? We've kind of hinted at this. We've kind of talked about its history at a high level, but what is Satellite and what problem does it try to solve?
Oh, you mean me? Oh, sure.
I'm not going to do all the talking.
Well, I mean, I usually like to refer to Satellite 6 as a very robust content engine. You're basically getting all the content you want to present to your hosts, and you want to control that very specifically. Like in Linux, you cannot install what you can't get. So if you want to have a very well-defined environment of applications or a specific stack, you're able to create and curate that build process of which hosts or set of hosts or organizations, what packages they can install, update. You could even then start creating a lifecycle management. In the past, you had to do that via methodology, whereas with Satellite 6X, it is actually baked into the systems. You can actually have your prod, your test, your dev environment, and have those different versions of the code, as in there is a known issue or bug came out, you're not going to introduce it to production until it's gone through its proper testing. So you can actually go through those different life cycles, but it actually has a mechanism to maintain those life cycles. And even if you wanted to have what you've decommissioned, even have that there. Let's say you have an audit 18 months from now, and the auditor wants to know what happened 18 months from now, you are actually able to show that. So it's, yes, most people think just patching. Yes, it does patching. It does it well. But the content management engine does a fantastic job in that respect. It's a security tool as well. It is a way to give, it's like a force multiply, be able to treat either one host the same way you would treat 1,000 hosts. You don't have to go touch 1,000 hosts to do a YUM update or do a specific security fix. You're able to do them in groups or in fleets in a way that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and what we'll see in our next episode is that you can create content views, which allow you to define basically the packaged lifecycle of your systems. So you can set up, if you've got like 4 environments, you can set up dev, QA, stage, production. And you can basically graduate a package or a group of packages through the different environments, so that when it comes to patching time, you can take your systems out of the load balancer, you can run your patches, and it'll only get those packages that you have okayed, to then restart those services. Hopefully you're doing some sanity checks and then putting those systems back in your load balancer. So it really helps manage that packaged lifecycle. A lot of systems don't run on the bleeding edge. They don't get all the latest and greatest packages the day that they come out. If you do, more power to you. Next time we're at a conference, I'll buy you a drink, because I wish that I'd worked in an environment where I could just run DNF update and go on with my workday. But patching always was a big ordeal. And one of the other things I can think of using satellite for was, I've been in environments that have thousands of servers, and you don't want 1,000 systems going out through your internet pipe to pull down, like this operation was 400 some odd packages. That's a lot of bandwidth. And that takes a lot of time. And especially if you've got a very tight maintenance window, I don't want to wait for those 400 packages to download 1,000 times. So you downloaded it down into your data center once to Red Hat Satellite, and then you've got those same 1,000 systems pulling 400 packages from a single server there locally in your data center. And we'll talk about some of the other concepts like capsules and multi-site and that kind of thing in a future episode. But just the ability, and one of the other environments I worked with was a government organization, and they were very strict on public access. And it took everything our team had just to get approval for limited number of ports, opened up on the satellite server to talk to the Red Hat CDN. And that was the only internet access any of our servers had to the outside world, was through that satellite server. And you see that even more today with Red Hat Insights. Red Hat Insights and satellite talk to each other quite a bit. So you can actually use satellite to talk to Insights, and use satellite. You can initiate operations on satellite from Insights, like if you're trying to do some sort of remediation for Insights vulnerabilities, something along those lines. You can be logged into Red Hat Insights and trigger actions on your satellite server to be executed against some of your clients.
But there's also those environments we don't talk too much about. What if you're somewhere without the internet, but you still need to update your systems? Satellite does that quite well, because you could actually literally have your internet phasing satellite that's going to download your content, and then you're going to put that in a portable media, you might say, that you then have ingest or an ingress into your offline or air gap satellite environment once you've validated and checked and make sure everything is kosher. Yes, you're able to incorporate it and then deploy it as needed. It is seen in government environments, highly secure environments. I've seen it in cruise ships.
Oh yeah, satellite would be an awesome use case for a cruise ship. Maybe a cruise ship will sponsor the show, and you and I will get to go for a cruise and do the episode.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Anything's possible.
All right, so our satellite package has installed. So let me find my place in our notes again. Speaking of Insights, I honestly didn't check this beforehand, but I want to switch the camera view here. I'm flying solo. I got spoiled by having Nate on RHEL Presents the other day as a producer. So if you haven't already, please go out to all your systems, install Insights. It is amazing. And if you're not sure how amazing it is, go check the Modernizing RHEL Management miniseries that John Spinks and myself did last year. Still very applicable, really awesome. Luckily, my RHEL 8 template that I've been using already has it installed. And since my system is registered, I'm going to go ahead and skip the registration process. But that you'd run sudo insights client register, or if you're using the RHC command, you can actually register your system with Red Hat Access and Insights at the same time. So I'm just going to go ahead and have my system check in real quick, which is basically Insights is going to pull all of the data that it usually pulls and upload that to Red Hat Insights at the hybrid cloud console.
So, Eric, I'm just noticing Carlos posted a question regarding deploying in a disconnected environment. The requirements are the same as they are for satellite, but you would basically send up 2 satellites. One that would be connected to the internet, which is going to basically pull in all the content that you need, and then you would export that content to a media that you would scan, verify that it meets all your criteria, and then it can be imported into the air gap, the offline satellite environment that then can be pushed to all your hosts. And all those hosts that you have would register to that satellite server. So they don't need to go to the CDN to register. You don't have to individually go in and manually register each one. No, the whole idea is to make satellite sort of like your single source of truth for your environment and the content and registration. Yeah.
All right. So I mentioned that I was actually able to run the installation with Firewall enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and configure my Firewall here. I'm not using satellite to do anything crazy in my home network here. I don't want to break Plex because then my wife and kids will be on me. So we're just going to open up HTTPS for now. Maybe we'll get a little crazier for the next episode, but for now, I don't want to get in trouble. Yes, no I am the systems administrator in my own home. So now comes the big bit here. So let's break down this gnarly command here. So we're going to do a sudo satellite installer. We're going to choose satellite as our scenario. The other scenario that I can think of is capsules, and we'll talk about those in a future episode. But we're basically just telling the installer that, yes, we want to install satellite. We're going to call the initial organization Acme org, because why not? And then the hat tip to Matthew Yee, who's my counterpart on Red Hat Satellite. He's based out of Vancouver. And then we'll give it the admin username of admin and the initial password of Red Hat 1, because why not be super secure in our home lab? We're going to kick that off. Now, this is going to take some time. In fact, it even tells you this will take some time.
Find your favorite beverage and sit down.
Pretty much, yeah. So it's going to go through and it's checking to make sure that everything's configured correctly, and then it's going to start the install process. And we'll revisit it a time or two here as it moves forward. But while it's kind of doing its own inventory, Rich, why don't you tell me a little bit about availability? So we're running RHEL 8.10. So there's considerations to make on the client side, but let's start with the server side.
Well, on the server side, you want to have a RHEL 8 server. I mean, right now, we started with a RHEL 8.10. Perfect place to start. That is the latest build, I believe, that's available. So that is a great place to start. Now, you always want to read your release notes, because there might be some instances where they might have locked, saying, well, for this particular release, they might only want a certain version of RHEL, as in a few versions back, they might have wanted version 8.8 until some patches were available. So you always want to verify you're at the right. But in general, yes, you want the latest version. And as I said before, I tend to patch it within an inch of its life, so nothing is missing. But don't install packages you don't need.
Yeah, for sure. And to that point, if you're just getting started with Red Hat Satellite, now is a great time to do it, because RHEL 8 is the preferred and RHEL 8.10 is the latest, but it's also the last minor release of RHEL 8, which means that for the next 4.5 years, basically, RHEL 8.10 will be the latest in RHEL 8 and will be supported for 5 years. So if you want a nice stable base to build a permanent satellite server off of, a production satellite server, RHEL 8.10 is the way to go. There's not much reason I can think of, if you're starting from scratch, to use a different minor release of RHEL 8.
Everything, all the newer versions are usually, if you encounter an issue with the support issue, the answer is going to be you need to update to the latest version.
Right. It is worth noting that RHEL 9 is on 9.4, but Satellite isn't ready for RHEL 9 just yet. There are some changes
Not
in the
just
underlying
yet.
operating system, and so Satellite is still being adapted for RHEL 9. So that's just something to keep in mind. However, that doesn't apply on the client side. Client side
Correct.
supports not only RHEL 9 clients, so basically the systems that we want to administrate with Satellite. So RHEL 9 all the way up through 9.4, which is the latest. RHEL 8, all the US releases, RHEL 8.10, and in fact, it even goes earlier. I forget exactly how far back Satellite 6. What are we installing? 6.15 will manage. But if you've got RHEL 7 systems that are now on ELS or should be, PSA here,
Yeah.
folks, RHEL 7 is now out of maintenance. So if you are running RHEL 7, talk to your account team about ELS support, because that'll be very important for the next few years moving forward. But Satellite does support ELS. It does have the understanding of EUS releases. So that's not holding you back from deploying Red Hat Satellite clients.
Yeah, so if you do it from basically 7 all the way to the latest version of 9, you're covered. As a matter of fact, when the initial release of Satellite 6.0, it ran on RHEL 7.
Yep.
So it has migrated as technologies have evolved. So in the future, could we see it running on RHEL 9? Absolutely. I would not be shocked, just not within the next 12 months.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't have any details on when yet, but I know that's coming. One of the things that has been the focus of the last 3 or 4 Satellite releases has been stability and usability. There's been a ton of overhauls to the UI, especially UI-based workflows. The menus are so much smoother and they're so much easier to understand. There's been a lot of underlying work to some of the databases that are included with Satellite. So a lot of maintenance work being done to Satellite. It can be a bit of a resource hog, but the last 4 or 5 releases have really focused on kind of easing that resource burden.
Oh, absolutely. When it was first released, I believe we had 3 or maybe 4 databases that it maintained.
That
And
sounds
over
about
the
right.
years, we've collapsed it to something much more manageable. I mean, it is truly performant when I compare it to what was first released. What I like to remind people is, so Satellite 5, based on Spacewalk, was one project. Spaghetti of project of code. This is, think of it as multiple unique projects that have been amalgamated to create Satellite, because the technology underneath it are very robust on their own, standing on their own, but together now they have been fully integrated, tested, verified, and certified and maintainable. So all the things that it's able to do are pretty amazing. And usually when people start digging underneath the hood and seeing what really makes Satellite sing, they're quite impressed of what has been done. The engineering has been taken place here.
Being a standalone project was pretty great, but
Oh, yeah.
Satellite 6 and beyond is quite an impressive feat of engineering. And especially once we get to the console and you can see all the different menus, all the different operations and types of operations that we can get into, it really is amazing that all those pieces work together in such an effective way. So we're still configuring here, and that's the that's the risk you run doing this live. But so we did have one other discussion item that we'll cover, and we've hinted at it a few times, and we've answered a couple of questions in chat about it. But so we've talked about connected versus disconnected, but what if it's distributed? What if we have a data center? What if we've got not multiple data center locations, and then maybe we're out in the cloud as well? But I don't want to have to stand up multiple satellite servers. There's got to be a way to make that easier, right, Rich?
Oh, sir, one satellite to rule them all. You can have actually the way you can configure it, for example, is to have a satellite server, and then downstream from it have capsules. So capsules are basically registered to the satellite server, and they'll get all their content and commands and things to do from it. So you could have, for example, let's say you just had one massive data center that you had thousands of servers. You might want to have maybe one satellite server and a few capsules to distribute the load in different environments to log into it and register to it. You know, call capsule 1, 2, 3, and 4. Or you want to keep your control and content as close to the hosts. And if you have multiple data centers, you can have a capsule, let's say, at each data center. Which, by the way, once you have your subscription for satellite, you know, we figured we should give you enough to stand up. So by default, we have to pick a number. Somebody threw a dart to a board, and we picked 50.
That's about what it feels like.
Right. On day one, it's like, well, how many should we get? Well, you get 50 satellite servers. That means you can set up one satellite server and 49 capsules. Or let's say you wanted to have, hey, I want to have a satellite server just for dev, completely separate from. You could do that. You could also use the Lifecycle environment and separate them, or via organizations and separate them. But yes, you could actually have separate satellite servers and act independently. Or have one that, for example, can do your data centers. And let's say you have some cloud instances, and you could put a capsule on said instance, and then control your cloud instances, whether it be AWS or Azure or IBM's, or I think we even have, I think I left one out. Google, Azure, AWS. I'm sure I left one out. Anyway, but you're able to do that across the board and you're in the same way. Or you can set up a satellite server on a cloud provider if that's what you wanted to do. Now, mind you, it's using resources, and especially when you have environments that you want to have your on-prem look exactly like your cloud or vice versa. That would be an instance that might be attractive. Or there is an option you can actually clone a satellite server, like the configuration, lifecycle environment configuration, and the all-powerful content views. You can create those and then clone it and make a copy to attach to another satellite server you have. That's another option. Or for those, I don't know, disconnected environments, that's another time that where it might become attractive. Or for DR purposes. I mean, the use cases are plentiful, but what you utilize those tools for. But yes, you have, we got you covered. And if you're not sure, give us a call.
Yeah, in fact, as a solutions architect, that's a big piece of what you do on a daily basis is connect with customers and help match problems to our solutions.
I love to solve a problem. That's what really drives it. To help and solve a problem, that's really what gets me going. So I love to hear what people are trying to accomplish and see how can come up with something simple to make their lives easier. And definitely, especially when I hear we have a few hundred servers and we're doing it manually. Is there a way we can simplify that? Yes. There's multiple ways we can help. Let's see. Carlos just checked.
Oh, yes. Thank you to Rick Green, who's a Red Hatter, I believe. Rick, I think you're still a TAM, right?
Yes.
But a little bit earlier in the episode, and I was actually on the side trying to verify. But Carlos is trying to use his developer subscription for individuals, his D4I subscription, to install and deploy Satellite. And it looks like Rick did me a favor and checked, and it doesn't look like Satellite is included in the D4I.
It would show up satellite infrastructure subscription.
But Rick did provide us with a command. So if you've got RHEL, you can run that command and see what you do have access to. That developer subscription for individuals gives you up to 16 no-cost RHEL systems. I actually use my D4I subscription here in my home lab. I guess I'm using my employee subscription for this system, but you can run a number of RHEL systems in your home lab. There's talk about a satellite self-paced lab. We're still working on it, so it's not publicly available yet. But that's but what you can do is spin up a satellite in a cloud environment. Hyperscalers like Red Hat, hyperscalers like AWS have RHEL marketplace offerings, and you can spin up a satellite server on one of those marketplace offerings, especially if you want to kind of follow along with this, and you only get charged for your data storage and your runtime. So if you spin up a RHEL 8 box in AWS and give it the resources that you need, spin it up, use it while we're live on the air, and then shut it down after the show, it may not cost you all that much to be able to follow along and play at home. Or wait, but that still doesn't get you satellite content.
Oof. Still got to pull it.
I'm going to have to talk to the business unit. I'm going to have to talk to the BU about getting satellite support for D4I.
So here's something interesting you kind of mentioned, alluded to. The specs that you would want for a satellite server. Over the years, it has changed, but I have found that it's always good to start with at least 4 cores for the CPU. More is better, but at least 4. And I remember with Satellite 6, it started saying 16, and they creeped up. Realistically, your jumping off point should really be 32 gigabytes of RAM to start. If you have more, if you spare more, yes, especially if it's going to be under a lot of load, because that is their go-to. Yeah, what you can see is the beta, which is not what you. Well, I mean, you can certainly play with the beta version.
So tell you what, Carlos, put that question in the comments below, and I'll do some checking and I'll get an official answer on that. I didn't think it was included, but hey, I mean, if you can get access to the beta, at least that's something, especially for home lab use. Let's check on our server here. We're slowly but surely, we're up to 1500
almost there
out of 1645. I think I've got one more topic we can use to stall just long enough for it to finish. So let's see. So as you can tell, sometimes live streams are easy, sometimes not so much. Doing an installation episode, I had intended to have a second system up and running, but that had the installation complete. I like my cooking style shows where I can start work on something and then switch over to a different system in case we run long. But just for interest's sake here, this virtual machine has 372 gigs of storage, 20 gigs of RAM, and 6 CPU cores.
So if I wanted to turn my satellite server into a hot rod, what I used to do, and I still do in my home lab, the pulp directory file system is on a 1 terabyte NVMe. It's a database with 32 gigs of RAM and 4 to 8 cores, depending on how I was feeling that day, because I did not want to wait on disk IOs. But you don't always have that choice.
So as we are waiting on the last few steps of the installation process to complete here, it usually finishes up fairly quickly at this point. First off, thank you all for joining us, whether you're watching live or watching deferred. Really appreciate your time. There's so many things that you could be doing. So hanging out with a couple of nerds talking about satellites and making fun of each other live on air. Definitely appreciate you hanging out and joining us live. If you like the banter and if you like the live content, the chance to learn right from your own desk, you can join us. What is today? Thursday. If you're watching this live, you can join us tomorrow around noon Eastern. Nate and Scott will be live on Into the Terminal. We'll be talking about troubleshooting Linux services. So nice. System CTL all day long. What happens when you go to start a service and it immediately throws up all over you and says no? And then a good friend, mentor, and the person I blame for the path my career is on right now, Noah Chalai, will be joining Nate and myself next Wednesday. He's the host of the Ask Noah Show. He'll be joining us on Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents next Wednesday to talk about what it's like to be a Linux user in community. I'll tell a little bit about my story and how I went from being a Linux systems administrator to sales to marketing. And we'll get Noah's experience as well. It's his fault that I got into podcasting and eventually moved into marketing. So excited to have my buddy Noah on RHEL Presents to talk about the community aspect of Red Hat and RHEL, or Red Hat and Linux, not RHEL specifically. Yeah. But and then, so quick overview of our schedule here. Right now, we're looking at about 5 episodes. Today we're installing, and before we sign off, I'm hoping that I have a web console I can log into and show you that, hey, it works. Next week, episode 2, we'll be adding hosts. We'll talk about registration, discovery, and how to automate your registration process. And we'll also be adding packages. We'll talk about what SCA is, Simple Content Access. We'll subscribe some repositories, and we'll build a very basic content view. So by the end of next week, you should have servers and you should have packages with content views. So we'll have you up and running next week. Episode 3, we're looking at CVEs and security mitigation. Rich, I cannot tell you how many times I look at like mainstream news, like not tech news, not nerd news, but like mainstream, and see yet another vulnerability live. So episode 3 here in 2 weeks, we'll be talking about CVEs and security mitigation. We'll talk about content filters, OpenSCAP, and the all-important question of which servers are impacted and how do I fix them. And then we'll be talking about management at scale for episode 4. We'll be looking at content hosts, some groups, orgs. We'll talk about a few other things like Cloud Connector and Red Hat Insights. And we'll give a hat tip to Ansible Automation Platform, which is not a replacement for Satellite. But you put the two of them together and couple that all together with Red Hat Insights, and it's beautiful. And throughout, and then episode 5, we'll talk about standardization and automation, talking about using Satellite for scheduling jobs, running tasks, and some cool stuff like system roles and how you can use Satellite to administer all of that across your enterprise. Forgive me, I've recorded 4 webinars, done a live stream, and attended a number of meetings today, so my voice is shot.
I was going to say, I wish I had a lozenge to give right now. Sorry.
And through all of this, we'll have plenty of hands-on, and we'll share some day in the life stories. Hopefully, I can get back at Richard for making me tell that Firefox cert story. But we have stalled long enough because the install has been complete, and in fact, it gives us some commands we can run if we want to go ahead and set up some capsules. But we're not going to do that today. So instead.
Well, if you can go back to that screen you were just showing us. Sorry, I meant to stop you before you left. So the one thing to bear in mind at the very last thing it posts there, package versions are being locked. Very important to keep that in mind. I've seen individuals who will say, well, I'm trying to upgrade. It's not letting me, because Satellite was going to package lock the Satellite server. Make sure you don't install a newer package that has not been verified and validated that it will not break Satellite. So it takes care of itself. Very important.
Yep, it uses its own Satellite to manage itself. It's actually kind of crazy if you think about it, but let me find my...
I could spend 5 minutes talking about that, but I know we're over time, so...
We are a bit over time, and I was a bit afraid of that, but hey, we're doing a clean install today, so why not? All right, so I checked. This should work. When I click the button.
There we go. No man in the middle attack. All right.
Yeah, no man in the middle. Actually, this is Chrome, so what?
Same thing.
Anyway. All right, so I put in admin is the initial username. I put in our super secret password, and if I type my password correctly, what do you know? Live on the air in 49 minutes, we have a Red Hat Satellite server up and running.
It's a beautiful thing.
Of course, we have no hosts, no content, no packages, no nothing, but we have a working Satellite server.
Yes. So I'll tell a story. So everybody who ever installs Satellite, there's a catch-22 to satellite. What should you never ever do?
Publish your password to GitHub.
Okay, two things. The second should be never register your satellite server to itself, because if you happen to break your satellite for some reason and then you need to update your satellite, it can't, because you broke it and it can't get any updates from outside of itself. So never register a satellite server to itself.
It's a really good point, and I can't say that I've ever done that before.
Yeah, never do that. If you want to know more, ask me why I know this.
So today we're going to pick up where we left off, although sadly, Rios, this morning, while running through all my commands to make sure everything worked, my home lab developed a DNS issue, which it's never DNS, except it's always DNS. So my home lab is not cooperating, so I had to spin up a lab environment. But I'm kind of glad it happened, because I'm really excited to share that we, as of last week, now have a full-blown Red Hat Satellites workshop. So if you're familiar with our self-paced labs at lab.redhat.com, they're usually 10 to 15 minutes. This one is like 2 hours, and it takes you through some of the basics, some of the configuration. So don't tell Matthew, but I'm actually borrowing his workshop today to get access to satellite and a couple of RHEL systems. So hopefully everything will still work.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great setup. You've got a satellite box, you've got a couple of RHEL 9 hosts, instructions on the right, console on the left, and a link to the satellite console. I ran through it myself last week, preparing for the install episode. It's a great workshop. Huge shout out and thank you to Matthew Yee for setting that up.
I have used it multiple times since it was created. It has been a godsend, because when I want to walk through something with a customer or show them a concept, it is just available. It was so easy to spin up and just go through the whole process. So kudos.
And our hope for this mini-series, last PSA, I promise we'll get into the meat of the episode. But
Yeah.
if you look up there, there's a QR code. This one works. I tested it the other day. All you haters on YouTube, join our Discord. We've got a growing community of folks. We're up to about 140. My hope is that a group of you will, now that we've got this satellite basics lab, will go through this process with us. Almost like being back in college, where you're working on a lab together. So each week we're going to add more and more complexity to our topics. Today we'll see how far we get, but next episode will actually be in 2 weeks. I'm taking next week off. I'm exhausted and my health is not what it should be, so I'm taking some time off to recover before I cough up a lung live on air, which might be entertaining but not good for me.
It's August. I mean, we're just following the lead from Europe. Should be on vacation.
Well, we're in what we call faux fall, where the temperature dropped like 20 degrees, and then by this weekend it's going to be near 100 again. So it's no wonder that I can't.
Not in Texas.
All right, so
it's still triple digits here.
Oof, no fun.
Yeah.
All right, so last we left off, we talked about how to install some of the system requirements, some of the pitfalls of trying to set up Red Hat Satellite. But it's actually fairly straightforward if you follow the guide, and you can follow along with us. Just a number of install commands, a couple of really long ones. But when all's said and done, you end up with a Red Hat Satellite system that is up and running and ready to go. And so that's where we're going to pick up.
So one thing I would add to that, that we didn't mention during the installation, is this. So we did the installation, and as you mentioned, that very long command. You cannot treat your satellite server like you would just any regular old RHEL. As in, if you want to do updates to satellite and the RHEL itself, you're using that series of commands inside of it. As in, you're telling it, oh, I'm doing an upgrade, I'm doing an update. And because that mechanism is what also unlocks the version, so you can then update the OS itself, so it can then take the newer components for satellite.
Yes.
That's not really talked about too much, but it's just an FYI. So I remember somebody asking me, I kept running DNF or Yum, and it's just not updating. I don't know. That's why.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we mentioned this at the very end of the last episode, but uh, at the very end of the installation, there's actually a line of text and it's colored that says,
Mhm.
by the way, all packages are now locked. So only when you run satellite in that sort of maintenance mode can you do any of the usual systems administrative type
Yes.
maintenance tasks. So don't expect to think of your satellite server as more of a utility, as more of an appliance
Hmm.
than a traditional server.
Yeah. That's my last PSA for the installation and maintenance part. Let's roll
Probably
forward.
won't be our last, but we'll try.
Yeah, true, true, true.
All right, so let's dive back into our console here. This is pretty much where we left off last time. Was I was able to get logged into a satellite server. We fixed the
Hmm.
SSL issue in my browser before the show, so we were able to log in
Hmm.
successfully. And so now this is that moment. Like I've got to tell you, I've installed OpenShift like a dozen times, and I've gotten to this
Hmm.
point where it's like I have the console. Nothing's
Now,
red, nothing's flashing at me. Now what I do? So with Red Hat Satellite, that's what we're going to talk about today. So before we can start registering systems and deploying packages and doing system role-based configurations, probably be best if we had something to actually action on our servers.
mhm.
So what we're going to do is we're going to start with creating some content on our system. Before we do that, as a prereq to that, I'm going to ask the Rich explain SCA, Simple Content Access.
Well, oh, how much time we got? Uh, so when you think of simple content access in the past, it was you were setting some limits, as in you can only activate systems that have subscriptions, whereas SCA kind of flips that upside down, in which you have a certain number you run, but you don't have a limit that you're not able to instantiate a new one, which gives you that flexibility. But then you're shifting that mindset of how many do I have? You are deploying as needed, but you keeping track of what you're consuming. It's trying to simplify the whole deployment process, especially for organizations that are deploying and destroying systems, especially in their dev environment or in a cloud environment. It does simplify that process without having to create a new instance to a specific subscription, then removing that subscription so you can reuse it, because that innately baked in limit is no longer there. You have your number that you consume, and as needed, you can also acquire some more.
Yeah, and my buddy Rich Dorito likes to call it uh, ending up with a degree in subscription management,
Yeah.
and it's one of those deals where it's like, is this something we want our systems administrators to have to fight with, to go in and manage individual entitlements, to apply entitlements to get certain repositories enabled on your
I've done
system, or do
that.
we want you to just go out and
Use it.
manage your systems?
Yes.
Um, so simple content access is a way to do that. It really takes away a lot of the drudgery of managing subscriptions and entitlements for our RHEL systems. Now, any new satellite installs, any new customer portal accounts will by default have SCA already enabled.
Correct.
However, if you're joining us and you have and you've just taken over management of, say, a satellite system, you may want to make sure that it's enabled. And to do that, once you're logged into the satellite console, you want to go to Administer and then go under Organizations. And this mini series, Rich, we're working for Acme Org, um, and so over here, if you look for Simple Content Access, you notice that we've already got a check mark, so
Check
it
it
is
off.
enabled.
Yep.
Mostly because this was installed just a few hours ago.
It really does simplify things, though, because I can't tell you the number of conversations that people are trying to deploy, trying to move fast, and having to hit that pause button because, oh, our account's not right. I need to administer. I decommissioned 3 servers, but I have not put them back into circulation. This allows them to move forward. Well, mind you, you're still managing your inventory of what you have, what you're consuming, of course, but we've removed as much friction as we can to make it simple.
So now, while simple content access helps this a lot, there's still a couple of manual steps we've got to take before we can start downloading content. And the first thing we need to do is we basically need to take a handful of subscriptions and provide it to our satellite server. And to do that, we have to create what's called a manifest. And so we're actually going to jump out of the satellite console and go to the hybrid cloud console, otherwise known as Red Hat Insights. And we're going to go ahead and create a new manifest. So I'm going to go to console.redhat.com. This is the RHEL dashboard. And then under services, and then subscriptions. That should have been easy to remember. And then over to manifests. I kind of stuttered because usually what I'll do is just come up here to the search box and start typing in manifests, which brings you right to it. So as you can see, I've got one created already. This is actually applied in my home lab. I took some of my individual developer subscription boxes and created a manifest around that. You can once you've got that created, you just export it. It'll basically compile a file that you'll then download.
There's a caveat to bear in mind.
Yes,
you only
please.
want to include what you know you're going to use, not too much, not too little. So why do I say that? For example, one of the subscriptions you have available is the satellite infrastructure subscription, which is for your satellite server and your capsule. And by default, you get 50 instances of that. Do not put all 50 instances in your manifest, ladies and gentlemen, please. If you have one satellite server and you think I might have a capsule, you add that. One of the reasons why I stress that is if you have a system that's set up to automatically attach and grab subscription for itself as needed, it'll grab the first subscription that comes across that even closely matches what it's looking for. And the satellite infrastructure subscription does have RHEL included. So a RHEL system, by mistake, might grab your infrastructure subscription. So if you put 50, you'll have 50 systems using satellite subscriptions, which is not what they're there for. So you want to add what you need. In some instances, I've even suggested creating a secondary manifest to just hold all the satellite infrastructure subscriptions separately so they're not grabbed by mistake.
That's great.
But you would add the RHELs that you need. Go ahead.
Yeah, right on. And so now that we've got our manifest exported, it'll download as basically a zip file here, and that'll download to my local machine, which then we can jump back to satellites and apply it. And to do that, we'll want to go to content. We'll go into, I believe it's Lifecycle. Let me check my notes. Content subscriptions.
Subscription.
Right there at the top. And then we are going to wait for it to load. And we're going to add a subscription. And so you can see that this is obviously a work account because I don't have that many subscriptions in my own. And so we've got developer for wonder if our team realizes we have 3 of those applied. But anyway, so we've got this set up already. We can see some of the details. We've got a satellite infrastructure subscription. We've got regular subscriptions as well. We can see how many entitlements there are. We can see how many we've got consumed. We don't have any hosts just yet. So, of course, our consumption is going to be 0. Okay. All right. So we've got our manifest. And next thing on our list is we need to go and actually create some repositories, or more accurately define some repositories. So we're going to go to Red Hat repos, and that'll give us about 296 repositories. How about we narrow that down and just look at...
It helps.
Yeah, a little bit. That'll cut it down to just the bare essentials. So you can see we've got some of the RHEL 7s, we've got RHEL 8 and RHEL 9. We've got the satellite client 6, which we'll talk
You
about
definitely
here in
want
a little
that.
bit. Yeah. So because Matthew Yee is awesome, we've already got a bunch of these that have been configured. Goodness. So we've got app streams and base OS for RHEL 8, the same for RHEL 9. Then some of the capsule packages for 6.15. And then this client is what allows you to interact with your endpoints, your RHEL clients, back to satellite. So there's one for 8, one for 9. So because all these are already configured, what I thought we might do, Rich, is add a custom repository.
Okay. No, that's perfect. Now, one thing to always bear in mind, you see how he's being very specific. It's saying maintenance for 6.15 for satellite. Every time you do an upgrade, you want to look for the newer version and transition to that version as well. Sometimes we forget.
And adding a new repository to this list is pretty easy. Just grab the drop down. Interesting. It's super easy, except when it's not working. Okay. I can show you this through a custom repository. The fun of doing live streams. All right. So one of the most common repositories that I get asked about is EPEL. There's tons of others, like SAP's got their own repository. If you're like me and you use RHEL systems at home, there's a repository for installing Plex, all sorts of third-party repositories for any
NVIDIA
number of
drivers,
solutions.
little things like that.
Definitely. So EPEL is probably the one I get asked about the most. So let's go ahead and configure a custom repository. But to do that, we need to define the GPG key first. So we're going to jump over here under content. We'll jump into content credentials. We don't have any right now because we haven't really configured any of the repositories yet. Right. And so I'm going to create, let's do EPEL 9. So let's be really specific here and call it EPEL 9.
Very straightforward.
Simple is always better. Trying to outsmart yourself, not a good plan. Yeah. So then if you go out to one of the mirrors, you can grab the GPG key for EPEL 9, and we're going to save that. So now credentials have been... Sorry, Rich, if you're trying to talk, my streaming window is hidden behind my demo. So.
No worries. No worries.
All right, so we've got our GPG configured. Now let's go and let's create the custom repository. So we'll want to go still under content. We're going to go to products. Notice we've already got satellite capsule. We've already got RHEL for x86-64. We're going to create a new product. We'll give this one a name, EPEL 9. And then we've already defined our GPG key, so we just select that from the dropdown. We don't need to worry about SSL. Now, sync plans. Sync plans are really helpful. Depending on your use case, you may want to sync something every 6 hours, or maybe a couple of times a day, on a weekly or daily basis. So EPEL, I don't really want to have to... I'm managing an enterprise operating system, an enterprise fleet of servers. I don't necessarily want to have patches available every single day. So for sake of example, let's just do let's call it Sunday, weekly, and...
Yeah, for sure.
We'll do... So what we'll do is we'll select the interval. We'll do weekly, starting... Actually, if we started today, it'll kick in on Sunday. And then let's say 1 a.m. So what this means is every Sunday at 1 a.m. Actually, if I want it to be Sunday, I should select Sunday. Yeah. There we go. So what this plan does is any product that we apply this to will do a repository sync out to the internet every week on Sunday morning at 1 a.m. So we're going to go ahead and save that. Now that sync plan will be available later on when, say, we want to sync our RHEL 8 repositories, or if we want to create a new sync plan and maybe we want to pull down RHEL 9 packages every morning. Basically, go ahead and just create that sync plan. Pretty straightforward. So go ahead and save that product. Now we need to actually create the repository itself. Again, I want to be really specific with my naming, so we'll call it EPEL 9 x86-64. Because what we're going to do here in a minute is we're going to limit the packages we're going to sync to by architecture. So we can come down here and we can sync Docker files here or Podman files. Hopefully you're using Podman. We can do Ansible collections, but more than likely, and particularly in the case of EPEL, we want to do a yum as our type. So here I mentioned we're going to limit it to x86-64. And then we need the upstream URL. This is where does EPEL itself live? So I'm going to grab the EPEL 9 everything URL and plug that into upstream. Some repositories may have credentials that you have to put in. EPEL doesn't. And for now, we'll just go ahead and accept the defaults, except for our GPG key. We wanted to find that EPEL 9 key that we had and save it. Now, our satellite server is aware of and can communicate with the EPEL 9 repository out on the Fedora project website. So we're going to select that repository, and we're going to go ahead and click Sync Now. The nice thing is, once you click that button, it'll run in the background, so you don't have to wait on it.
The next thing is you can also do it as an ad hoc, and you can monitor the progress of it, if you so please, under the sync status section.
And you can get more details, let you know if there's any errors, or let you know how long it's been running. So if it's been running for 6 days, you might want to look to see if something broke.
Yes. A few minutes. Well, depending on your connection.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So now we've got an EPEL repository. Why don't we check on the sync status of our Red Hat repositories as well? Because this is where my notes are going to differ from the... All right, so if we expand all, you notice that we've already got syncs have already completed for capsule repositories, for our basic OS repositories, and for our satellite client 6 repositories. We've already got... we already had files. We've already had all that data synced.
The nice thing about it also is you can always click on the upper right-hand corner just to display the ones that are active. That way it can simplify your screen. So, you know, that's what you truly care about right now. What's active? What's the process? So
For sure.
There are a few minutes to go.
Luckily, we don't have to wait on EPEL.
Nope, we do not.
We don't have to vamp while satellite installs this week. So now we're starting to sync all these packages down to our satellite system. And that's sort of the crux of what satellite was originally designed to do. Of course, in the coming episodes, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the cooler features, like creating basically jobs that can apply system roles to your system. But for now, we need to start being able to deploy packages to our hosts. But before we start registering our hosts, there's one more thing we need to do. And this is where you can get yourself into a lot of trouble by overthinking things. And that is creating a lifecycle, creating a lifecycle environment. So we're going to keep moving down the sidebar here, and we'll jump into lifecycle and lifecycle environments.
So one thing that happens, by default, all content that is hosted on satellite server is available in the library section. So that's where all the packages are going to reside. As you can see, we have, 79,866 packages. Just a few.
Yeah, a couple of dozen.
Yes. And I've actually seen organizations where they just wanted single content and they did not want to filter it. You could literally pull a package directly from the library, but that's bypassing or not having a lifecycle management activity take place. So why don't we go ahead and do that?
And I think that really takes away from a lot of the power that satellite offers.
Oh, absolutely.
Once we create once we add a couple of stops on our path, we'll explain why. So let's go ahead and create a new environment path. We're going to give it a name. To make life easy, let's just have two. We'll have dev, and we'll give a super detailed description. This will be all of our non-production systems.
Perfect.
And then let's go ahead and create our second environment here, which, go figure,
Production.
Would be production. Yeah. Who knew? Well, so we've got non-production and production.
There's another way you could also do it. As you can see, they're separate. You could add to the one that says dev and have next to it, add a production to it. So they lead to each other.
I thought that was on the content views.
There's so
ahead of
many,
myself.
as I say, there's so many different ways to do it. It can be done exactly the way you described it.
Actually, I think I like that. I like that approach better. Yeah, like all things Linux, there's multiple ways to do this, but Rios is right. If we do it this way, we can actually build a kind of a timeline.
Yes.
So it's much more
As
visual.
things
It's easier to
progress,
follow
get
this way.
promoted, they go to the next environment.
All right. So
And you can have
now,
multiple of these as well.
so maybe you've got a, gosh, software as a service.
Yeah.
And so now you can have the same package and multiple different streams, if you will,
Mhm.
different paths. Um, and we can talk about promoting content here in just a second. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, and think of it this way: you can also have a life cycle for your web servers, a life cycle for your database servers, for your email, all the different environments or different lines of. I mean, the limit is really your imagination and how much time do you want your satellite server to process all the changes. So you want to keep it simple because you can get really complicated, but you really truly want to keep it as simple as possible.
For sure.
I'm an engineer, so I like to get creative, but at the end of the day, I want it to work.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and create a content view. And this is where all these different pieces will start to come together. So my clients in this lab are RHEL 9 based. So we'll go ahead and create a RHEL 9 content view. Rich, would you typically select solve dependencies or do you leave that unchecked?
I will check that till the cows come home.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and create our content view, except we got an empty error. That's always great. When in doubt, click it again.
Yeah, try it again.
No. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
All right.
My session expired. Oh, no. Should have been good for 2 hours.
Okay,
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
it's quite all right. We should be able to get back to where we were fairly quick. But the biggest thing about being able to do that is the fact that once you create that content view, you can then associate it to multiple lifecycle environments, and then you can start versioning the content as it can be consumed by your hosts. Let's see how far do we need to start on this session. Hopefully, I know is it spawning a new instance by chance?
It is, and it's going to take about 4 minutes to do that.
Yes,
So
that's okay.
let's see what state my home lab is in. We may
Yeah,
be able
no
to pick
worries.
the example up there.
That's the one thing that that people who are new to satellite is understanding that its true mission is to become the single source of truth for your organization as far as your RHEL content, right? So you have one place to get the versions that have been approved for all the hosts to consume. And via both the lifecycle management and the content view, you're then creating really it's like a subscription basically of what you want those hosts to consume. And the beautiful thing about that is even if somebody were to physically go to that host and type yums or DNF install or upgrade, they would not be able to install a package if the package was not available within the content view. So if you filtered out that they can only install the basic packages in HTTPD and that's it, they would not be able to install any other package outside of that. So you can now have very tight controls of the actual binaries that are being installed, the version of those binaries. You can go as far as a specific release date of a binary, which really becomes important, especially when you're dealing with has it gone through testing? Has it been validated and approved to go into production? So you could actually set up filters to certain dates, any content post this date, do not allow it to go to production, for example, because it hasn't been fully tested. And then you begin testing on the next iteration. So all those things are baked in. where in the past with the prior version of Satellite, with Satellite 5, uh, you achieved that through your methodology. There wasn't an actual mechanism within Satellite to do that for you. You had to do it yourself and keep track of it, and make sure your team was the same page of what the standards, what the approach was to achieve that. So that being said, uh, what state are we in now?
With that
Hey,
being
look at
said,
that!
I've very quickly pulled up my satellite server here in the home lab. My DNS issues aside, we should at least be able to create a content view.
Awesome.
May not be able to register hosts, but hey, we can at least finish our example here while
One step at a
my
time.
Instruct lab comes back online. All right, so let's go ahead and create a content view, and that'll help us
Mhm.
explain what it's for. Let's go ahead and create that view. It works. my home lab didn't expire. That's good. So this view obviously is brand new, so we don't have any repositories added to it. Let's go ahead and
Right.
show repositories. And what you'll see is that I've got some RPMs for 8, some for 9,
Mhm.
although my example was going to be based on RHEL 9. So let's do this. Let's delete our RHEL 8 content view. I don't want to do all that. I'm going to recreate you, I promise.
And there it goes.
That's always
Don't
fun.
worry about 8. Let's just focus on 9.
Except I don't have a repositories for 9.
Ah, well, that should be pretty easy to just.
Let's see. I'm trying to think what would be quicker to run back through everything we just did in Instruct, or probably just run back through this real quick. We spent a lot of time talking about Apple. All right, so since I'm doing this on air, I'll walk you through what all I'm troubleshooting here. I've got Apple 8 configured. I've got my manifest imported for my developer for individuals. I go over to Red Hat repositories. I've got stuff for 7 and 8. Now I'm going to narrow down my list even further for, let's just cut it down to Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9.
Mhm.
I need my base operating system packages.
In
It's
upstream.
just what I was going to show you was that, see, you can add repositories by minor version,
Yes.
by architecture. It's taking a very long time to add that.
I have seen organizations that instead of doing just the RHEL 9, they'll very specifically say, well, our company standard, we're doing 9.2. And then they're going to skip from 9.2, they're going to go to 9.4. So they don't include the other ones. So once again, you cannot install what you can't see or what's
Yeah,
not at the
exactly.
repo.
And in fact, that's why content views are so aptly named.
Yes. It's very simple, but very powerful.
If I pull this out to another window, I don't think it'll confuse everybody. Well, that's loading for whatever reason.
I bet you the disk IO is going bonkers.
Well, fortunately, I don't hear the discs. They're across the hall,
Okay.
and
That's the
when it
one
really
thing,
spins up, I can hear it.
yeah, over the years, is having a nice high IOP disks for your VARs directory, where the majority of the content for satellite resides, can really improve the performance and responsiveness. Both the database and the content itself, which takes quite a bit of disk space if you select everything under the sun.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'm actually kind of doing this really quick on the side here
Mm-hmm.
as my lab environment is back up. Okay. Well, that's kind of funny. All right. So like we just tried a couple of times, we're going to once again try to create a Tedcom content view.
Yeah, no worries.
All right.
Let's
So
try
we're
it
going to show
one more time.
repos.
There we go.
I wonder if maybe I should cut the last like 10 minutes of this out because this is fun. All right. So we're focused back on RHEL 9. So I want the base OS and the AppStream repositories. Definitely want those. And then probably going to want to get that client 6 for RHEL 9 repository as well. I'm going to go ahead and add that.
So while we're adding that, so Carlos Porter asked a question. When new repositories is added, all the packages from it are sync. Once you do your sync, So what happens when you remove said repository?
Sorry, I'm focused on trying to get caught back up
Um,
here.
so in prior versions, it would not, but I believe that has been addressed with the latest version. Actually, a few versions back, because I was running the SA Labs satellite server, and we did a lot of adding, removing, and sometimes they would not disappear. Hence why I got a very intimate relationship with the VAR uh, file system because of it. Hopefully that helps, Carlos.
All right, so I think we're ready to move forward here.
Fantastic.
While you're answering Carlos's question, I was kind of just
Yep.
checking on a few things. And hopefully, yeah, it's supposed to be 2 hours. There's no way that I don't know why, but I spun up that environment like 15 minutes before our show, so we should have been fine. Oh, folks, the joy of live streaming. If you want to come back and watch the replay later, I'll make sure to put chapter markers in place so you can skip over all that, because now we're back into talking about content views. So we just created that RHEL 9 content view, and we added in the base OS, app stream, and satellite client repositories. And you notice we've already got a bunch of packages. We've got green check marks. We're good to go. So now we'd created a non-prod and a prod stream. Now we need to do what's called a publish. So we want to publish a new version because we don't have one. We'll just call it initial, if I can spell. And then we want to promote. So like Richard said, all packages are always available in library. But now we want to promote all of the packages in our repository into dev. Basically what that means is any system that you have registered and basically earmarked as a development machine will now see all the packages in our repository. The nice thing is, as you start into a patching cycle, you can promote packages. So if you've got 1.0.0, you can put that into dev. And once you're convinced that all of your dev servers didn't develop issues, all of your applications still run as expected, then you can promote that package, that 1.0.0 package, into
Production. Yeah.
And as you're doing your production patching cycle, you can actually be taking version 1.2.0 or whatever and pushing that into dev. And so you can be moving packages up through the chain as you get that testing taken care of. I should have clicked finish.
I figured we'd get there eventually.
All right, so this task is running, so we're going to go ahead and let that run. So it shouldn't take too much longer, but we can go ahead and move forward, and we'll come back and check on that task here in a minute. So now we've got a bunch of packages, and they're being published into a new content view. But that's not going to do us a lot of good unless we have some hosts to apply to these. Correct. So what we want to do is we want to open up our hosts, and I think the only system we have right now is the satellite server itself. So let's get us some clients. Now, if you run through the Instruct Lab, it's self-paced, and here you go. There's instructions, there's the link to the console, and then we've got RHEL 1 and RHEL 2 as clients. So on the satellite server, oh, sorry, getting ahead of myself. I was excited to show you the Instruct Lab. So before we can register any systems, we should probably have a way to register them, because if you're registering 500 systems, I don't want to put in my username and password. That's where activation keys come into play. So we're going to, still up in the content lifecycle, we're going to create an activation key. And this will somewhat automate the process of registering our systems with our satellite server. So let's create our activation key. We're going to be super specific here and call it RHEL 9. And then let's add all these systems to our non-production, to our development environment here. And we'll add this activation key will allow us to register any systems to our dev environment and apply the RHEL 9 content view that we're currently building. All this will make sense here in just a second.
Can I pause you there for a second before you move on?
Please. Save me.
One thing Yes. One more thing you can also do to make your life a little bit easier. You see where the section where it says release, says activation key, release variables, I believe.
Right.
Right. Right.
Sorry, I've got so many
Click
windows
there,
open.
pull down, and now you selected RHEL 9. So you very specifically had told not just with the content, you telling it this is RHEL 9, ladies and gentlemen. This is what you should be expecting. And you can go further than that if this is production. If this is development, on the left-hand side, you can then put in, for example, the type of subscription they have. Is it a premium? Is it a standard? Is this development? Is this all the roles? They can be predefined here on the left-hand side for the host that will be consuming the subscriptions. So you're doing all those things that you do individually. You'll be doing it just by adding a subscription key. All these tasks are handled just by adding the subscription key when you register them. Okay, all yours.
All right, so we've got an activation key. This will somewhat automate the registration process, whereas otherwise you'd have to put in a username and password for an account that had rights on the satellite server. But instead, we can give it an activation key. And then we're going to do one more thing. We're going to create a group because it's easier to manage systems on the group level than it is to manage 1,000 systems by hand.
Mm-hmm.
So under configure, we're going to create a host group. Create a group, and let's call this group like Rios was talking about. He was suggested dividing up systems by workload. So we
Mm-hmm.
just got, let's have a generic application server group. And so if you've got multiple satellites or multiple capsules, you can actually select where that source is coming from.
Which is actually quite important. If you have multiple data centers or multiple locations, you want the one closest to, preferably in the same location as your host, right? To lessen that latency and traffic that's going to generate. If it's 1,000 systems are talking to the satellite server, you want that satellite or capsule to be as close as possible. So you can delineate, and it will always communicate to the one that they are set up to originally.
And just the same, we can get very specific here. So if we want this to be a dev group, we want it on RHEL 9. We can add in other things like OpenSCAP. We can have certain Ansible system roles run against any hosts that are in this group.
Also
but for
useful.
now, very useful. For now, we'll leave it at that. Now we've got an application server group. We've got our activation key. So we know where this client is going to live on our satellite system, and we've got the key to open the door. Pun intended. Now, my apologies, due to DNS limitations in the lab environment, we've got to do this part by hand. So we're going to jump into the satellite server itself, and we're going to paste this somewhat gnarly looking command, but we'll walk through it. It's not too bad. So Hammer is one of the underlying services that runs within satellite. The next is host registration. That's what we're going to do. And then a subset of that is we're going to generate basically a registration command that we'll then copy and paste into our clients. We created that application servers group. So we're going to specify what group this system should live in. We're going to ignore any SSL errors because this is a lab environment. And for now, we're going to skip setting up insights. But if you're running this in production or in a real environment, you should always register to satellite, always. And then we're going to force the registration command because I think these are already, although something goofed.
Host group not found.
Application server. Did I just say application server? Nope. Application servers. This is why I copy paste. In fact, just in case I goofed up the spelling or something, let's do that.
All right.
I was just making sure you were paying attention, Rich.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
Missing activation key. Oh, yep. So what we're going to do is activation.
Key.
Activation key. And we called it what? RHEL 9?
I believe that was the name.
RHEL 9. Yep. Okay, so this should work.
There we go.
So it spit out this even more gnarly looking command. But the nice thing is, all you have to do, highlight it, copy it, and then we're going to jump over to one of our client systems here
Mhm.
and paste it. So all this is going to do is it's going to pull down the registration information from our satellite server.
Mhm.
We've already given it an activation key, and it's going to run this as a bash script. And basically what it's going to do is going to change the target away from redhat.com to your satellite server, and then
It's
proceed
going to
with
move the CDN,
registration.
basically. As far as that host is concerned, all future communications to Red Hat will be to the satellite server, not the internet based. And this is one of the ways you can have a like an air gapped environment through a satellite server, because it would handle all the communications and registrations and subscriptions, all those fun things through itself.
We have
Looks good.
successfully registered RHEL 1. Now,
Mhm.
if we come over here and look at
Hosts.
hosts, we should have a brand new shiny system.
There we
Yes,
go.
we do. RHEL 9.4. It's in the dev environment, and notice that we've already got some errata that we could apply. We get some basic information about who registered it, the IP address, um, and once this kind of syncs, we'll have additional details.
Yes.
Anything from like what some of the hardware is, um, and we can go in and start making some changes here, or just update some display information. There's some integration between the client satellite and insights if we were to have set that up, but this really gives us a way to start managing our systems at scale.
I mean, that's what really truly makes satellites so powerful. And if you're just doing it for one host, I mean, you can, but it's when you're doing
That's a lot of work for one host.
500 hosts, 1,000, tens of thousands, then it is such a time saver, because it's such a repetitive task you're doing across just a fleet of hosts. You're able to do that. Just treat thousands as one.
And that's really easy to do with groups. So what we've gone through today is we've gone in and we've created content views. We've set up our life cycle. So maybe you've got development, test, QA, staging, production. You can lay that out in a very logical order and add systems to the appropriate groups, get them access to the right packages. And then what's really nice is we can come in here and we'll be talking more about errata in our next episode. But one of the key things is looking to see, are all my packages up to date? Do I have any that need to be updated?
That this is the section a lot of people struggle with. It is so I stood it up, sync my content, but how do I register my hosts? How do I go about it? Uh, this, what we just did, it's fairly straightforward. Could I automate this? Could you create a bash script to do this? Absolutely. Could I use Ansible as a tool to do this, to a fleet of hosts that I already have? Absolutely. Does it have to be a new host? No. It could be you could have been running RHEL for years and added a satellite infrastructure and then have it register and function in that fashion. Uh, it's very flexible in that space. It is truly meant to be a sysadmin's best friend, to make your life easier, to give you a single source of truth for you to move forward.
I wanted to do a little bit more of an in-depth recap on what we've done. So we took a RHEL 8.10 system. We made
Mhm,
sure that the disk layout was correct. We did an install.
mhm.
You can check that out in the playlist. The link will be below. Check out episode 1 on how to install satellites step by step. We did it on air and even talked about what satellite was in between the package installations. So, pretty good episode. We talked about setting up repositories. So, as I kind of click on the buttons, Rich, you want to very briefly talk about what some of the different views are?
Sure. Once we had the installation, we then started looking at our subscriptions, what we were going to make available to our hosts. As in, we had got our manifest, and in there we added the subscriptions for both RHEL and satellite itself, so it can be consumed by hosts in the future. And if we can go to the next section, then we added some actual content, so the host could actually get their binaries. We had enabled the recommended section, so it's going to By default, it's going to give you all the OSs you're probably going to want without all the optional and additional content, but specifically the agents for satellite, the version of RHEL you're probably going to use. And as you see here, we have some RHEL 9, both the base OS and the app stream. Keep that in mind. From after RHEL 7, this is the approach on 8 and 9 that we're going forward. On RHEL 10, we expect to see something very similar to that. Let's see what else did I think that's all we added. And what was the next step? We also added
So then
a
we
third
created
party
some
EPEL.
lifecycle environments. We did do
Yes.
we did add EPEL as a third-party repository, although I didn't
Yes.
set that back up today.
That's okay. Just I thought I'd mention it. So we had Apple added in case you need something from Apple, and created the sync. But then you want to have your different environments for, let's just say, your production and your dev or test staging. Sometimes you have just 2, sometimes you have 5. Just depends on your environment. And you might even have different ones for different organizations or for different business units or different roles. But for this case, we're trying to keep it nice and simple. We have just production and dev. And I believe we created also a content view to be go along with that. If we go there, basically we selected and told it what actual. Did we add the repos? Did we get to that point? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, we got everything set up last time, so we
Okay,
got
so
all the way up to.
All right, so we did get all the repos installed that we wanted. As I mentioned, the client, the RHEL 9, and the apps. We didn't create any filters, and we created it. That created version 1 when you get started. From that point on, I believe we went to version 1.0, and those are all the packages and the errata, accompanying errata that goes along with it. And then what I call one of the magical components of satellite, which you'd be surprised how many organizations do not use activation keys. So we created an activation key where it really puts everything together. And by that I mean, you're selecting when you add a host to your satellite server and use an activation key, which if you look at the that'll be in the next window. We can select what environment we're going to go to. So dev in this case, and the content view that we have for 2024 Q3. And we've already pre-selected the service level. So all the hosts that we're going to add are going to have a standard subscription. They're going to be in the dev test environment. And they're going to be RHEL Linux servers for the role. And you can even have add-ons. One additional thing you can even go to include is, you see the section where it says release version. You can even stipulate there the version of RHEL that's going to be. You can say, hey, this is RHEL 9. So the person who sees it automatically be able to tell that. Now, if you go into the repository sets, it should have in there the repos that we've added to it. And there we go. All the RHEL 9 and satellite clients, maintenance, and we have not added any hosts. I think we might have one already that we added. If we can go to host collections.
Yeah, there should be one host. But maybe not.
And by the way, it does take a while for it to populate depending on how you have your environment configured. And if you click on associations.
You know what? I may not have re-registered that host.
That's okay.
Nope, there it is.
No, there it is. There it is. So that we have that one RHEL host that has been associated. This is on the host collections, meaning one thing we could have done, we created a host collection of groupings and include that. So they'll belong to the group. For example, you could have a group of web servers, databases, file systems, whatever you might have, or middleware, whatever you want to call it. But you can also associate that. So the powerful component of satellite is the treating 100 hosts as one. Right, it's not the one-off work. It's when you doing it in tens or thousands of hosts. That's when satellite really becomes that magical tool that makes your work so much more efficient. All right, so I think we're there on that space. Do we want to go visit the sync side, or begin the actual? Since we already have the lab up and we have our RHEL 9.
Well, before we go too
Go
deep,
ahead.
I know we talked after last episode that we kind of glazed over activation keys fairly quickly. So
Yeah.
I know you had some additional thoughts you wanted to share about activation keys, sort of in the real world.
Yeah. So actually, I just had this conversation with a customer of mine, in which is, you initially do your activation keys and you think, I'm good, right? Everything's working, and in new systems, I just add them and I'm good to go. It does all this work for me. It puts everything in its right place. But what if a year later you have a renewal of your subscriptions and the subscription number changes? Things of that nature. And yes, you want to have your host to auto attach the subscriptions so it can pick them up. But if the subscription that you had before in your manifest has expired, it can't grab that. So you want to make sure that you've added to that subscription key the new subscriptions as you acquire them. Otherwise, it's going to go, nothing. Is there anything that even resembles for what I need? Oh, you have, I don't know, 20 satellite infrastructure subscriptions? Those will do. I'll grab those. So be mindful that you want to have it up to date, and that's where you want to go, instead of having to touch every single one. By doing it at the activation key level, updating the subscriptions, it is done just once, and all of the systems that have been activated with that can take advantage of it.
Yeah, activation keys are so powerful. I mean, just beyond the ability to register a system without having to type in your username and password 1,000 times. But as you could see, you could designate what environment that you're in, the level of support, premium or standard, designate whether they're production or non-production. There's just so much that an activation key can do. Just like Richard was saying, just make
Yeah.
sure that you stay on top of those subscriptions.
And there's the other, on the flip side of that. Let's say, as an organization, you have a new division you're incorporating, or you spin it off a division, right? This is going to be a solely owned subsidiary. They're going to go on their own. You could actually take some of those hosts and separate them and move them to maybe a new organization, or a new new grouping, things of that nature. So you, instead of having to do one-offs, you can grab a whole set, for example. So all those changes, not just renewals, but changes to your environment, or let's say, you have a new ability to some new content. Let's say a new repo you want to include. You can add that at the activation key level, and then it'll now see that repository, because once again, you cannot install what you can't see. So if you have not added that repo to be part of the activation key and part of that content view, they can't see it, they can install it or update it.
All right. So now that we've given activation keys a little bit more of the attention that they deserve,
Mhm.
why don't we dive in? And where we left off last time was we'd gotten our first host registered, but we haven't done anything with it. So I was thinking, Rich, if you're
Mhm.
so inclined, why don't we dive into the host view and see what
Yeah,
information that Satellite collects on RHEL 1?
the very first one. All right. Right away, is the nice thing about it, is telling us right away what we have as far as any outstanding security bug fixes that are available, that have been, I should say, have been synced to the satellite server. Very important. So if your last sync was a month ago, that's the content that is going to compare and tell you what you're missing. So this is why many organizations might have a much more frequent, especially when it comes to security syncing, depending what your requirements are for your organization. That way you can begin the testing and validation before you bring it to production. But yes, it'll show you what bug fixes you're missing, as far as what security fixes you're missing as well, the level of severity, what the binaries that are affected. Let me cheat a little bit. I'm going to go full screen so I can read this, because my eyes are not what they used to be. Um, So we have 26 bugs and 20 in security. If you can go ahead. Yes, I was going to say, click on one of them. It can give us a better visibility of what we have here. And you can see we have some low, some high, some moderate, important. And if you were to, for example, right click on the very top one, the moderate one, kernel level, and right click and click on new, this will work. Oh,
I didn't share the window. I only shared the tab. There we go.
got it. Okay. Here it's basically taking us to a much more deeper insight into what exactly it is. It's showing us the actual CVE that's associated with it, what it does, what Red Hat has done to show what it's affected. And if you go back up, it's telling us that we need to reboot to take effect. You can then, if you had a myriad of hosts, you can see which ones are being affected. And the pack, you can do look at the repositories as well. But more specifically, people are going to be more interested in the packages that are really being affected. So they can start looking at, okay, are we consuming any, obviously we are, because we have a host that is affected by it. But now you're seeing exactly a full list of what's affected. So let's say if you have your in-house development and you're worried about, well, how's this going to affect us? You can now go to your dev teams like, okay, these are the things that are being affected. Let's start looking at it. Let's do some testing, see if the new fix is going to break our application, all those things. These are very useful information to have handy and to work with your dev team in that respect. You think you can roll back to where we were before?
Yep. Although I just broke my share.
It's okay.
Doing great. Let's share the window instead. I was trying to be efficient here, and that didn't work out.
Hey, I'm in a great mood. Okay, we're below 100 degrees here in Dallas, Texas. So that's a day of celebration. Is actually we're in the 80s, ladies and gentlemen. That is amazing for Dallas, Texas.
So tell you what, why don't we fix one of these? Why don't we fix one of these CVEs?
Okay.
And then we'll jump into installing packages. So one of the nice things about the satellite console is that everything is filterable. So we can always, if we're looking for enhancements, bug fixes, or security, we can filter that way. We're already looking at security, so why don't we just go and see in our environment, is there anything that's critical?
Nope.
Good news is our one system, our one dev system, has no critical issues. So I'm going to go ahead and clear out that filter. And let's check important. Okay, so we do have a handful of important ones. What about installable? There's a difference here, and it's very subtle. The main difference between applicable and installable is applicable is it exists, but it may not impact your environment.
Exactly.
Versus installable, this is a problem. There is a package that can be updated. So why don't we just narrow our list down a little bit further? And now we've got 10 items here that are important level. And I know all of you are awesome sysadmins, and you'll go through and check each one and make sure that everything's kosher before you go in and start applying fixes. But we only have a 30-minute show, Rich, so why don't we go ahead and just select all?
Wow. Okay. All right. And
then
here's the part where everybody gets starts asking questions like, well, which one should I do? For this particular case, we want it right now. So we would just click on apply. But you could schedule a time. Let's say you're an organization that has a Patch Tuesday policy. You could certainly do that as well. So here we'll look at the job. It's going to process it. This is a demo, so it's like Vegas rules. Like, all right, come on, 7.
So we can actually go all the way down to the host level itself and see that it is, in fact, installing packages.
And
watch this live.
It's going to, because it is a kernel module, and I believe one of the things we read when we looked at the CVE, that it does require a reboot.
It does. We're not using Kpatch, and we don't have Tracer installed on this host, but we did notice in the CVE that it will require a reboot.
Right.
That is not what I wanted. There we go. Back to Java.
Santano,
That's what I
thank you
wanted.
for doing the conversion of Fahrenheit to centigrade. I've lived in the States so long that I don't think along the lines of centigrade so much, but it's pretty darn hot in Texas. All right.
So it's still showing pending. So why don't
Yes.
we circle back to that? Just because this is a live demo, it could take a minute. So far we've worked with one host in one environment. So why don't we go ahead, because we do have two hosts in this environment. Why don't we go ahead
register those bad
and
boys.
let's set the stage. Sorry, I'm refreshing my lab on the back end because it timed out on me last time, and I don't know why. So it says we have an hour and 17 minutes left on this lab, but I just refresh it just because I'm a paranoid systems administrator. Yeah, a little bit of activity. All right. So we've got one host in one group in one dev environment. Let's double that, and let's have a second environment with a second host. I know we're getting crazy on the RHEL Presents show today.
I know.
All right, so let's start from the top down. We're going to start back in content.
Yep.
We're going to go into Lifecycle, and let's go to Lifecycle environments. Actually, we already did this initially. We went ahead and created our prod view. So what we need to do is adjust our content view.
Ooh, you want to create a different version for dev and one for production, don't you?
Actually, I was thinking we just promote the existing content view, and then
that's what I mean.
We'll create a second view and show how that works.
Yeah, because we want the newer view to go to dev and the older view to go to production. So yes, makes perfect sense.
So if we were to jump into our time machine here and move forward a few weeks, so you see we've got a content view created, a lot of environments that I worked in, patched by quarter. So you do dev test 1 month, you do stage and pre-prod the next month, and then you do production the third month. So it was broken down by quarters. I always wanted to get that down to monthly, but that never worked, unless I spent all of my time patching. But so a lot of times when I think content views, I think in terms of calendar quarters. This, again, your mileage may vary. So we've been working in dev. We tested like some of the CVEs that we deployed. We've got some systems registered. We're happy with it. All the devs and DVAs have signed off. So let's go ahead. We're going to promote this content view. So the Q3 sync, let's go ahead and promote it up to production.
We go. It's been around long enough. 26 minutes is enough for it to be promoted to production. I mean, come on. Of course it is. It's been fully vetted by now.
Hey, if you're using CI/CD and infrastructure as code and all those things like you're supposed to, it might be enough. But
of course.
But in our book, 26 minutes is more than enough time. So now all those packages that we had in 2024 Q3 is now available to our production servers. So then as we move forward, we'd probably want to create another content view, and this would be 2024 Q4. So we could go ahead and start building that library of content for the next quarter. We'd go through the same process. We'd pull in all of our RHEL 9 repositories. We'd add those. We'd want to update our activation keys. But now we've got a second view here.
Before you click away, if you can go back one, I know I always do this to you. So this is where you could also get creative and say, you know what? This is the second iteration, content view version 2, and we decided we don't want anybody to even think about install HTTPD on those hosts. So you could actually put a filter in there and say exclude the package and say, you know what? I don't. Put the name exclude filter, and HTTPD. Oof,
that is one of the hardest package names to say ever.
I know. And then you could actually add to the rule. So guess what? Anybody who even toys with the idea, if they can't see it, they can't install it.
We're an Nginx only.
That's right. Hey, but that's the idea. So as your environment evolves and you define what the new standard is, or security says, you know what? nobody should be able to install these packages. You can start excluding them, so they're not even an option. So when they give you an audit, it's like, well, hey, they've been excluded since this date. All right. Hello, for those who's joining us. Thank you. All right, go ahead. Sorry, I know I caught you midstream, but I think it's powerful to show that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing I forgot to do was we forgot to publish this. So we're going to go ahead and promote it.
Well, I stopped you right before you publish. It's like, wait, one more thing. Do we want to publish it to...
Don't forget. Don't forget to publish. Otherwise, your systems will just stare at you like there's nothing there. So that'll publish in the background. So we've got our new content view up. So we're in Lifecycle. We've already got our Lifecycle environment. We've got our content view. Now we want to go ahead and update our activation keys. So now this one, we'll want to update.
We need a new activation key.
Well, we can update the old one first.
Yes.
Because now
we're
any
on the
dev
Q4
systems that we
view.
register, we want to register to the Q4 content view.
Yep.
Now, like what you were saying, because we don't have any systems registered to production, now we'll want to create a production.
I kind of wish it had an option to say, clone this one and then give you the option to change the content view and the environment, and you're done. And obviously name. But that's just being picky.
Yeah, it's a fair idea. So you notice under environment, I selected production, and it only has one of those content views. That's because 2024 Q4 hasn't been promoted up to production yet. So we'll select the only option available. We'll save that activation key. Go check on repository sets. Make sure that anything that's RHEL 9 is enabled.
Yep.
Notice that Satellite Client 6 packages isn't enabled by default, so we'll go ahead and click that checkbox and override to enabled, because we want those satellite utility packages available in case we decide to use them. And notice here, I'd filled this out ahead of time in the other view. So it's a production box, so maybe we want premium support. Yeah. And then usage type, we already mentioned it's production. And we're just going to kind of fill this in here and narrow down the scope. So if you had like an EUS add-on or HA, high availability, we could add those to this key as well.
Resilient storage, any one of those.
Yep. So now everything's kind of narrowed down a little bit. So now we've got our production activation key.
Yep.
Now we need to go into a group. So we're going to go under configure. Host groups, we'll have our application servers group. And this is kind of nice. I probably should rename application servers, but we're going to actually nest inside application servers. We're going to have application, what do I call it? Prod. Sorry, I got to check my notes here because otherwise copy paste doesn't work here in a minute. Yep, application prod. It's going to inherit the satellite source. We want this one to point to prod. So it automatically updates with the content view. We'll talk about Ansible roles next episode. Hint, hint. It'll be fun. So then we want to add our activation key. I think that pretty well covers it. So let's go ahead and create that host group. So now you notice we've got one subgroup, we've got one host, nothing in application prod yet. So now I've got to go in.
Got to register a host for it to show up.
Right. So once again, this is a limitation of the lab environment that we're using for this. Otherwise, you could do like auto discovery, or there's a number of different ways that Satellite can find these servers. But because the lab environment we're going to use this fairly gnarly looking hammer command, which is basically going to generate a command for us that we can run on the host.
Nice.
So we've got host group, again, lab environment. So we're going to force the registration. We're not going to use insights today, and we don't care if it's secure or not. We just want to generate that command. All right. So this even more gnarly looking command, it's going to point to where the system should register to the URL. It gives us basically a registration key, and we're going to run all this through Bash. So RHEL 1 is our dev server. RHEL 2 will make production. So we're going to run that, And just like you would do a subscription manager register or an RHC register, it's going to go through the registration process.
It's usually pretty quick.
Yeah, it
especially since
usually
it's
moves.
local.
Yeah. Yeah. So now by the time we go up here to monitor, dashboard.
You should have an additional host.
So it's not showing up here, but I bet by the time, if I were to go by all hosts, there it is.
There we are.
Ta-da! So you notice it's in the application prod group,
Right.
And it's starting to populate a lot of those same bits of information that we saw in the dev environment.
And I believe it's the same build, so it's going to have the same bugs and patches. Although, if we were to look at the RHEL 1, since we have patched it,
that task should
reflect the
more
patches.
than be done by now. In fact,
yeah, but it might require a reboot for it to register all everything has been patched.
So why don't we check on jobs here? There it is. Install errata severity important. Succeeded.
Yep.
Total host 1. We can go in and look at some of the details.
Success.
That's always a good sign. If you had any failures, you could look at host detail and get some additional insight.
Yeah.
And just in case, on the back end here, I'm going to go ahead and reboot RHEL 1. But in the meantime, our production environment isn't going to be much good without some packages, without a workload. So what I'm thinking is, why don't we install some software?
Okay.
So if we go in, RHEL 1's rebooting, so we'll do this a little out of order here and go to RHEL 2. And one of the things that we were looking at was the packages and package versions as they apply to errata. But if we were to come into content and look at packages, you can see everything that's installed, including everyone's favorite text editor, Vim. We can see what version. We can see if there's an update available to it. But I want to install some packages here.
Emacs to make everybody go nuts.
How dare you? I just blanked. What was I doing? Oh yeah, I'm installing
a package.
Yeah, see, there's now people in our audience that cannot get out of Emacs because you mentioned it. So thanks a lot. So if you go into content,
I am known to be a bit of a stirrer.
That may or may not have been why I asked you to jump on this mini series with me. So if we go into content packages, we can install packages.
Oh, absolutely.
And trying to think of one that's not typically installed here. What about maybe we're running
a great one.
So Cockpit should be installed, but how about some Cockpit add-ons? So I think what I was that's exactly what I was thinking of.
Love me some Podman.
Yep, all of my home lab systems have Podman on them.
Yeah.
Of course, it's taking its sweet time thinking about whether or not it's actually going to install.
And that's okay. While it's thinking, I just learned something new that I think we should share. So in our first installment of this series, we talked about the version of RHEL you needed to install Satellite on Satellite 6.15. So Satellite 6.16, which should be coming out very soon, you can install it on RHEL 9.
Really? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. So on 8 and 9, you can do start with 8 and upgrade to 9, or do a migration. There's multiple ways, but that is one of the things that I know people asked us, I believe, in the beginning. Yes, that people want to do it on 9. Yes, you will be on 6.1, so 6.16. Of course, as I say that, I always have to put a caveat. That's what is expected until it's released and it's GA. But what I've been told, this is what we should be expecting.
That's great to hear. And with that PSA in mind, our inventory of packages finally decided to load. So one thing that I found incredibly helpful is I do like me some Podman, But what's even sweeter than Podman is installing Podman images with Cockpit. So if you're familiar with the RHEL web console, there's actually a plugin for managing Podman. So let's go ahead, and we could just install it right off. But I won't this time, because this is production. I don't want to break anything during the day. We're going to customize our execution. So it's going to pre-populate what the job is. There's other jobs like Ansible commands. You can run bash scripts. You can run convert to RHEL, leap. Actually, I should
a smorgasbord of commands.
Yeah, a little bit of everything. So we're going to go ahead and use Catello because that's what Satellite's using in the back end. And we're going to install a package. So let's go ahead and click next. And we're going to apply it to the one host. We could apply this to individual hosts. We could apply this at the group level. Yep. Groups is probably the way you want to do this, but we'll just go with the host level.
One-off. Right, this is just a one-off right here.
Yep. We can include pre and post scripts. If we need a special SSH user, it gives us a lot of options here. But
you could even add a reboot, couldn't you?
Yes, you could. So now we're going to do a future execution, and you can either set this statically or dynamically, more or less. When do you want this to run? I could see using this like in the case of an emergency patch window, where you want to make sure you get the absolute latest version of a package. But we're just going to do a static query, whatever version of Satellite whatever version of Cockpit Podman we get, that's fine. So let's go ahead and let's have this install at 11 p.m. I figure that way it can install and I can check on the job right before I go to bed. There shouldn't be any other users, so why not? Of course, this is Central Time. I can review my options and click submit. Now, if this lab were to live long enough, which
it would happen,
it'll be offline in about an hour. But but then when we came into the office tomorrow, actually something we may want to do is restart the Cockpit socket. That way, next time I log in, I've got all the updates to Cockpit as well. So, I mean, that's just one package on one host. There's so many other things we could do. That kind of brings us to the end of our prepared comments. Oh, wait, nope. So we talked about content views and promoting content through different views. There's one other thing that we might want to consider is we want to know when new errata is available without impacting our views, or without impacting what packages and package versions are in what views. So the way we can do that is we can actually define a sync plan, and we did this briefly in the first episode, I think. So this may be something you want to run every night. And so when I was a satellite administrator, one thing that we had was a sort of a sandbox. And so any sysadmin tools, any Bastion hosts, jump boxes, whatever you want to call them, that our team managed, we didn't care to run them through the patching cycle. They were kind of outside of that. And so they just got the latest, greatest packages always.
Right.
So that's what that library view can be used for. So what we might do is we might set this up to where all of our repositories sync daily at, say, 2 a.m. We'll have this start tomorrow at 2 a.m. And I'll sync every day at 2 in the morning. That way, when I get into the office, all my repositories have synced and all those updated packages will show up in the library. They won't be applied to certain content views. So if I go to install a package in production, I don't accidentally overwrite it with something that hasn't been tested in dev, but at least I'll have that information and it'll be stored on my satellite server. That way, when I go to check a host or a group of hosts, that I can see that, oh, there's a new piece of errata here. So we need to check this package and promote it through ad hoc through our content views. So we created our sync plan. Now we can go in. We don't have any repositories, so let's go ahead and let's just sync everything. Why not? We're at the end of the hour.
Right. That should be on the list. Yep.
Yep.
There's
There we go.
two. Boom. Good to
So
go.
there we go.
Select the action. See, as always in open source and in Linux, there are so many different ways to do the same thing. We can go back to the menu. We can, from here, select the activity, the action to take. So,
Yeah, I could even sync it now.
yeah.
All right. Rich, any closing thoughts?
No, I mean, I got to tell you, the time goes by so quickly.
It does.
With what we try to accomplish. The one thing we haven't done is actually, now that we have two, or if we had more than two hosts, create a group and then get the most everybody, I imagine, can get the concept of having those grouping and applying the activation keys or the repos or the content there. The filters side of it that we kind of touched upon it, it could also be very powerful because within the filter, you can even put a set up filter on a date, as in, do not give me any content that's newer than today's date, for example. So any new content that becomes available, you won't be able to see to install it. So for testing purposes, as you're evaluating each one, those are some of the other features that are available to it. And did you know that on satellite, you can basically put anything? And when I say anything, meaning, yes, the use case is for RPMs, obviously, right? But being that is based on upstream community project and open source projects, is you could put a tarball, you could put an MSI file for a Windows server if you want to. Not that it is supported or something I would recommend, but you could really put just about anything on the satellite. So you got to be very mindful of what you want to do and what you can host. But for the organizations that have third-party applications, let's say your Apex or an application that you want to keep in a certain version, that the vendor is very specific of the binaries that you're going to utilize and present to your host, make sure there is no delta to affect production. Satellite's such a powerful control, so you can have that governance and reduce those outages of, oops, somebody updated by mistake because they did yum update and there was no filter.
Yeah, I mean, we are using the most basic of basic setups here. I mean, one server per environment. There's so many different ways to skin this particular cat.
Yeah.
Like quarterly content views. That's only one way of filtering your content. There's, of course, if RHEL Presents had a budget, we could spin something up in one of the hyperscalers and really show off the power
Yeah.
of satellite. And it'll give you a really good idea of what satellites like, what you can work with. You can experiment with some of the filters and some of the scheduling and that
Absolutely.
kind of thing. I think the labs last for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. So get in there, play with it. You only have a couple of hosts you can play with, but this gives you a chance to see what we're seeing.
It's a good place to fall down. It's like you have an idea. It's like, oh, I don't want to mess with our production satellite server. This is a great place. Like, what happens if I do X, Y, and Z? Well, what if I had a nested configuration? Well, it's going to affect production, the performance of how, when you promote things. So this is a place where it is safe to try and fall down and just do a sanity check. Is it possible? And does it make sense? Just because you can, just remember, doesn't mean you should do certain things.
But Richard, I don't know if you know this, but Red Hat Satellite is not just a patching tool.
Ooh, do tell.
Do you need a moment? Should you sit down?
It is the Swiss Army knife that nobody knew they had if they have satellite, because it could do so many things, but most organizations will use maybe 3 of the capabilities of satellite, but it can do so many things. I always go back to the thought of it is your single source of truth for your organization. You can have all your content, and I always refer to it as a content management engine, because ultimately that's what it's doing. It is pulling in all the RPMs, holding all your content, whether it be from Red Hat, or it could be a third-party repo, or even if you're doing your own in-house development, and whether it be a tarball or an RPM, you can hold it within satellite and distribute it, and the versions of set files. So, which becomes really important in those mission critical environments. Or when you have those air gap environments that really can't be touched into the internet, but you still want that granularity and control, satellite just shines in that space. As a matter of fact, uh, ships that float have been known to pull into ports if somebody walks in with a USB drive that has the content for the satellite server, so they can then patch all the systems of said ships, or even aircraft, you might say.
Yeah,
So
that's
it
very
plays
true,
big
and that's
roles. Go
that's
ahead.
an awesome use case too. I mean, just the thought of like a cruise ship coming into port once every couple of weeks, you just carry a flash drive, copy the content over, create a new view, and there you go. All those servers, all those systems that run in the background that while you're sipping your adult beverages and getting
Mhm.
sun, you don't really think about the fact that there's probably hundreds of systems that are running underneath the covers of something as big as a cruise ship.
Oh yeah. It's a city, right? It has
Oh, for
all the
sure.
facilities and everything you would need. And the thing is, so after you do all those things, you start thinking, what else could I do with satellite? Well, you could actually do an OpenSCAP scan. You can centralize that and scan your system, define what your environment should look like, what would meet your, let's say, if you're in an environment that needs to reach or maintain a certain compliance level, maybe see PCI compliance or any other ones that you can think of. You can actually define what that environment would look like and scan for pass, fail, and in many instances, even mitigate that delta, right?
Hmm.
So you could be looking for those possible changes, organizations that are, let's say, maybe concerned about an incursion into their environment and somebody making changes that they're not supposed to take place. OpenSCAP could really be your best friend, especially for the SecOps team. Be able to specifically say, our environment has not changed, or we will patch on this day, and this is the security posture that we have defined, and this is what we have in place, and be able to show that not just today, but however long you've been running satellite, you have all those logs.
OpenSCAP is a great addition to satellites management capabilities. In case you're not familiar, John Spinks and I last year actually did a episode on using Red Hat Insights to overcome OpenSCAP deficiencies, shall we call them? And
Hmm.
the process is fairly similar on satellite. So, little bit of a disclaimer, and I'm kind of bummed, Richard, because
Hmm.
my satellite server here in house, as you might recall, about 2 weeks ago, uh, went belly up and died, and I just haven't had a chance to rebuild it after I fixed the DNS issues in my home lab, which it's always DNS. In case you forget, it's always DNS. Um, and so some of the registration pieces and some of the other infrastructure related stuff I'm not able to show in our satellite um, sandbox here that we have
Hmm.
today. But I didn't want to take a chance. I didn't want to take some time and walk through a couple of things that you can do from a management perspective. Um,
Hmm.
a lot of folks use tools like Kickstart or templated images that can very Kickstart becomes kind of untenable after a while, especially if a couple of generations of sysadmins have left since the original file was created. You have things like VMware templates or VM templates. Um, Take it from an old gray bearded sysadmin; those always end up just out of date. No matter how much you try, those
Yeah.
VM templates always end up just out of rotation there. You forget a patch cycle or you change
Hmm.
security tools or something, and you end up forgetting, and instead of fixing it in the template, you just fix it as you're building a one-off server, and just
Yeah.
it becomes more and more manual. um, so I would like to offer up satellite as a reasonable alternative. You can use
Hmm.
something like image builder to build the most vanilla basic um, RHEL system and then use something like Satellite to then configure it, especially if you're thinking about things like infrastructure as code. Like every systemd service, every configuration file should come under infrastructure as code. That way you can commit it to either Satellite or a Git repository, and that way all of your systems, when they're built, are identical. In fact, I'm kind of liking the idea of using Satellite full-time here in my home lab to manage a lot of my vanilla RHEL systems that I use for a lot of the demonstrations we do on this channel. And I think one of the reasons for that is the integration of something called system roles and Red Hat Satellite.
Which is part of the OS, but it's nice you can now centrally, as you register a host or change the system role for a host from a central location, depending what group they'll belong to or what activation key they have. Those are the things that are really powerful. But as you're talking about the different templates, it makes you think of an older Michael Keaton movie called Multiplicity, in which starts as the original guy, and then they clone him, and then the guy gets really busy and needs more people, so the clone makes a clone himself, so instead of end up having a clone. And by the time of the fourth version, he's not quite right. And that's the way sometimes it feels when you have this template has gone through all these different iterations, and people's like, who built the original one? I don't know.
Right.
It works, we think. And people forget what's in it.
Instead, you can use like host groups and content views to define what those images look like. So why don't we dive into Satellite here? And that seems a lot smaller than it did during sound check. There we go. That's what happens when I refresh the tab before we go live. So you'll remember we've got a production server here in RHEL 2. We've got a dev server in RHEL 1. And what I want to do is to be able to apply configuration at scale with Ansible system roles. So if we go over to our menu, look at configure. If we go down to Ansible, because system roles are basically configuration files that you build for Ansible core to then run. So if we look at Ansible and then go into roles, there's going to be so many. I mean, it seems like every release we come up with new, with additional system roles. I mean, just looking through here, let's actually pull out the upstream here. Let's do just RHEL system roles. Let's see, how many do we have? So we're up to 24. So we've got 24 RHEL system roles. These are based on upstream system roles called Linux system roles. Everything from AD integration to configuring cockpit to kdump. We could do any number of these, but what I want to do is we'll work on something that just about every systems administrator has to deal with, and that's the firewall. And it makes for a really easy example. So let's go in and let's define a variable here. Actually, there's an easier way to do this. I'm going to do this the way that I originally learned here, so bear with me. So let's go into host groups. And we'll go into our production host group first. And then under Ansible roles, I cheated and looked it up. It's actually on page 2. We'll go to RHEL system roles firewall. So right here. For me, this interface is a little bit easier to work with. To each their own. So I'm going to click on the plus button. And what that's going to do is that's going to change the assigned Ansible roles. So now we're going to define what our RHEL firewall system role is going to look like. And to do that, we need to define our parameters. So let's go to parameters. Let's add a parameter. We're going to call it firewall, I do believe. So we're going to take type, and that's going to be an array. I'm going to call this firewall. No, it's port, isn't it? Can't read my own notes.
If port is what you're trying to adjust, yes.
And then we're going to say for production, we want 443 because we want all of our traffic to be secured. So now we can submit that. Oh, values. Oh, that's right.
Sure, you need an array?
From the documentation that I read, yes.
Okay.
So what I want,
there you go. Yes,
that's what I want.
Multiple. So there you go.
We're going to define. I think this does need to be firewall. So we're going to define that it's going to be for firewall. It's going to be an array. We're going to define port 443 TCP, and we're going to enable that port. So
Those are the things that they would definitely want to know on the firewall side.
Yes. And so I make this I make this point because then what I want to do is go into our development environment, and we're going to do a similar process here. So if I confuse you the first time around, don't worry, I confused myself. So we're going to find RHEL system roles.firewall. We're going to add that to our configuration here. We're going to go to parameters. We're going to add a parameter. We're going to call it firewall array. I can't read today. And then we're going to enable port 80. So maybe in your development environment, you don't mess with SSL certificates, that kind of thing. I know back in my day, they were incredibly expensive. So non-production usually didn't have SSL enabled. Maybe you still think that through. Maybe that's still how you focus.
To play devil's advocate, what if you wanted to do 480 and 443? Would you do two entries?
That's a good question. And I actually don't have the answer. I'd have to pull up the documentation again, which is amazing, by the way. I was able to teach myself how to do this in less than a week. So now we've got the system roles configured. Now we need to actually apply them. So if we go into hosts, we look at all hosts. We're going to select all. No, maybe not the satellite.
Yeah, don't want to apply to the satellite server.
And then we're going to select an action. So what we're going to do under action is we're going to run all Ansible roles. So we could have come in here and configured our firewall, made changes to our SSHD configuration for remote connection. There's SE Linux, there's Podman system roles. There's 24 of them. So start using host groups and these system roles and their variables to really quickly configure your environment. So let's go ahead and run all those system roles.
When it comes to SE Linux, it's like, don't run RHEL without it.
Right.
Always have SE Linux on, please.
So right now it's getting ready to run against RHEL 1 and RHEL 2, so it'll run in production and non-production. It's pending at 100% right now. It's the fun of doing this live. Oh, there it goes. All right, so 100% success, no failures. So what that means is now we should have a firewall that's configured on both our production RHEL 2 system and our non-production RHEL 1 system. And of course, I shared a tab instead of my screen again. So let me switch my screen share here.
It's going all right. It's coming back.
So
I can't tell you how many times I've in my career I've told people to use SE Linux, and everyone's like, "Why? Just turn it off." It's like, no, you missed the point.
All right.
All right.
So
be back. There we go.
All right. So now I shared the window instead of just a tab.
All right.
All right, so now we're logged in as root on RHEL 1, and so RHEL 1 is our non-production system. So what port do you think will be available?
I'm gonna guess port 80.
I guess autocomplete is not installed on this one, so it's is it list. What did I do wrong?
CMD,
Oh, helps if you put in a hyphen. I think it's just list. Oh, sorry, I didn't copy this command down. Thanks. Joshua says it's a firewall -cmd. And it should be, let's see. I feel like a dummy here.
No, you just passed list.
Did I?
It was dash list.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Firewall cmd -list, and that should...
List all. There you go.
List all. Okay. Okay. And then, thank you. That took far too long. There we go. Port 80. That's what I get for doing this live. So now we're going to take the lesson learned from the server, and I'm going to just copy the stinking command, and we're going to go to RHEL 2, which, if you think about it, this is our production server. So when we look at ports,
list all,
list dash
all.
Copy the wrong command. I'm doing great.
Yeah.
So if you look, we've got port 443. So I know that seems like a very simplistic example, but think about this. You have 1,000 RHEL servers, and it's not just web servers that you're dealing with. You've got web, you've got MySQL databases, you've got custom homegrown applications. You've got Podman containers that use their own unprivileged ports. So, I mean, you could literally have thousands of ports to manage in multiple different environments. And so instead of trying to manage all that by hand, or back in my day, it was manage it all with like an Excel spreadsheet. Lord, do I not miss those
God love
days.
you.
You can do all this with a single source of truth, like Red Hat Satellite.
Yeah.
And the real lesson to be learned from this, Richard, is when you're going to do live stream, don't assume you'll remember anything.
I'm just glad I remembered my name. That's what I know I'm doing well. Right.
So, Richard, you had a couple of things you wanted to talk about as well.
And of course, I'm drawing a blank, but that's okay. For me, I kind of mentioned it in the beginning a little bit about all the other capabilities within satellite. The one thing I don't think we touched upon was, for example, you want to enable the satellite agent when you're setting up satellite, just to make sure that it is by default installed. It should be, but you always want to double check. I've seen instances in which systems have been registered and they did not. That can really be an issue going forward. But it's really, what are the tools you think you're going to need? Set up a repo and only show the binaries that you absolutely must have and exclude everything else. As in, if somebody were to gain authority over a host, if they can't get a certain executable to install it, you've removed yet another vector. Not just that it isn't installed, but even if they gain control, they usually need some tooling to do the things they want to do. By restricting that, once again, if they can't see it, they can't install it. So those are the things I always like to bring up. There's also some of the other feature sets that I don't think we're going to have enough time to talk about. Would you care to show again the
Sure.
the menu? Thank you. So if we were to go into, let's see, I believe it's in both in the host section first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if we go down to the compliance section, and I was talking about the OpenSCAP section. So this is where the magic happens in this space. You must first set up the OpenSCAP infrastructure within the satellite server, so you can then centrally create your policies and scan your systems. And in return, they'll give you a report, which is basically a pass-fail. You can also import some pre-made ones that are, for PCI compliance, and some other ones that are available, and you can take those, modify them, or create your own from scratch. Those are your choices. The nice thing about those is you can scan for as much granular information and configuration as you'd like, and in many instances is able to also generate an Ansible playbook to remedy set states if there's a delta. So imagine you design your whole infrastructure and what they should look like. Any deltas that you see there, you can now very rapidly roll those back. So it can be very useful, especially in an air-gapped environment where you don't have internet access. That's where I love Insights and everything you can do, but because it does require you to have a connected environment, for those people who do not or have some restrictions in that space, you're able to do this quite well. The other thing that I also want to bring up, I was going to say it's not going to have any reports at this point because we don't
have that. We don't have all the prereqs configured on this particular host.
The other thing is under the provisioning setup section, you could even set up a Pixie boot within the satellite server. So if you have a network boot set up, you can utilize and leverage your satellite server to do so. It can work with multiple, let's just say a myriad of hypervisors. So if you have a VMware environment or a Hyper-V or a KVM or an OpenShift, you can still leverage everything that satellite is able to do, and in many instances, even communicate with the hypervisor, so it knows what's available, and you can pass on some information to it, and even go as far as you can create your own custom media within satellite and make that available for your build as well. And as Eric was mentioning, utilizing image builder, you can generate your images on image builder and leverage, do a handoff more or less, have your initial image being built, begin your installation, and then have it automatically register to the satellite server, and the satellite server continuing the configuration and applying additional content and be part of the fleet. All right. Even on the architecture side, you can even specify, I think, if I remember correctly, satellite can even manage some RHEL on power installations as,
Yes, I believe so.
yes, and uh, mainframe as well. Let's
Yeah,
see.
it is an incredibly powerful tool, and this short mini series doesn't do it nearly enough justice. Um,
Yes.
if I would have had the infrastructure, we could have set up like get a DHCP servers, create some Pixie boots, and I mean, you could see how we can go from using activation keys to registering systems to applying all their patches to deploying Ansible system roles to these systems, um, using customized contents. We barely even talked about filtering. Um,
Right. There's also another component to be mindful of. So if we scroll down and go into the configuration section in the configure, you'll see there's an option there for both Ansible and Red Hat Cloud. If we go into Red Hat Cloud, you can actually configure the Red Hat Cloud connector. So satellite can be in communications with Insights. So as systems are, if you're in a connected network, obviously, as you register a system, it will get the Insights agent as well configured, and the information that it gathers then by the satellite server is sent to the Insights portal, and you get all the reporting, all the goodness from that place, and it all works as part of one ecosystem. As well as from Insights, you can begin, let's say, generate an Ansible playbook and execute that Ansible playbook to remedy the set state it has found, as one example, and it would actually send the command to the satellite server to then initiate the remediation via that playbook, which would be ad hoc or scheduled, right? But the nice thing is, it is works as one ecosystem instead of having to chase the activity, do it here, and then go here to satellite, and then no, you're able to initiate it there. Of course, could you do it separately? Yes, of course. Um, so that I find that also very useful in that space, and to just review again all the roles that are within Ansible. If you click on the Ansible option, you can see there the roles and variables that are available. So that gives you a better idea of what's going on and what variables. Does it have the firewall ones we just enacted? Don't know if
yeah,
it,
under variables. So
no,
I
not
was
yet.
interested to notice that they don't show up here, but that
Yeah,
we'd have to go in through the host group route.
right. Because these will be more of global variables that you're passing. These are specific to that group, to that instead of hosts that they're consuming.
Which would make a lot of sense if you have like a web servers group
Right.
that would install Nginx or something
Mhm.
as part of the group's configuration.
Or your company standard. You might say,
Mhm.
hey, all these ports by default, all hosts is turned off unless you belong to these set of hosts, and then yes, you can enable it, for example. So it starts as not just not turned on or off, as you are specifically saying no, they are blocked, they're not available, and then turning them on, going that extra step, that extra layer of security. And because of dual inactivity on my side, my environment, just went to sleep. So I was trying to stay ahead. So I click on things and make some suggestions to you. So those are the things that I wish we had more time, or in the future we can touch upon that if we want to have a deeper dive, or if there's a request or a demand for it.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking of a deeper dive into Red Hat Satellite, maybe using AWS architecture or infrastructure. Our lab environment's a little bit limited. In fact, if you go through the hands-on lab, you'll see that you have to jump through a couple of hoops just to get the host to register with the satellite server. Versus like Shantanu was talking about, subnets and setting up UDP broadcasts, that kind of thing, for like Pixie boot configurations. And if you can set something up like that, there's actually Satellite has the ability to do discovery, so it can watch a certain network segment and say, oh, there's a new host, and work with that host to get it registered all automatically.
Right. And for example,
I gotta tell you, Richard, I kind of wanna build a new satellite environment and try some of these
Tell me
things.
when, I'll give you a hand.
Might have to wait for after RHEL 9.5's out.
Right. So on the infrastructure side, one thing I do want to just going to touch very lightly upon, we can't really do a show and tell, is the Vert.who configuration.
Yes.
So for those folks that have a RHEL subscription with a virtual data center, and it's like, well, how do I configure my Vert.who? Here's some of the tooling that is actually incorporated to help you get started. I wouldn't say is the end all be all how to do it, but at least gets you halfway there, because everybody's environment tends to be their own bespoke, very special environment that is very unique to them. So this at least gets you started, and then you can able to tweak it to meet your needs, be very specific. Because most people actually have that available at the lab portal under the access.redhat.com on the portal. There's a lab section, and there was a tool to help you, generate a generic Vert.who. If you're in a air gap environment, you wish you had something like that. Well, it's actually baked in onto Satellite for that very reason, to make those niceties be available to you in those offline environments, or just right there. Don't have to think about it much. As well, if you had other satellite capsules, that's the same area where you would go under the infrastructure segment. When you have a satellite subscription, by default, I believe you get 50 satellite infrastructure subscriptions. Those are meant to run both satellite and capsules. Most environments will have one per data center. If they have hundreds or thousands upon thousands of hosts, they might have quite a few capsule or satellite servers. If you are running out, if you consume 50 of them and you need more, contact your friendly Red Hat sales associate or engineer. We'll be more than glad to see what we can do to help you out. We just had to pick a number. Somebody threw a dart on the board, and 50 was the number that they went out with. So that is something you can always keep in mind. Was there anything else? There's one other thing that's kind of on topic, off topic, but go ahead, Eric.
So I want to address a couple of questions that we had in chat before we moved on to our wrap up. The first was from Joshua. Joshua asks, use the Ansible system roles in Satellite. What RPMs need to be installed on your clients?
Well, actually, by default, if you have a RHEL 8 and RHEL 9, system roles is a non-issue, is baked into the OS. RHEL 7 is when it's going to get interesting. I don't know if we've expanded system roles to RHEL 7.
It's not installed natively, but most system roles are supported on RHEL 7. But to answer Josh's
7.9,
yes. To answer Josh's specific question, no packages are
Yeah.
required beyond the base OS
Mhm.
for RHEL clients. Everything is managed from the satellite server. So as long as your satellite server can talk to your end devices, you can run Ansible system roles. Doesn't require any software on other than like SSH on the end
It's on by
of the client.
default, so you're good.
Yeah. Um, so Shantanu asks if satellite software is also part of CS9. I'm assuming that's CentOS Stream. The question would be no, satellite is not supported, is a Red Hat product. It's designed for RHEL. In
Yeah,
fact, we get asked this question quite frequently. Well, why doesn't satellite support XYZ distribution? And the answer is that Red Hat is really good at building and engineering Red Hat things. And the farther away from RHEL that you get, the
mhm,
less confident that we are with managing it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Satellite is not a multi-Linux distribution tool. It's one
correct.
of the reasons why Satellite doesn't manage network hosts or like
Mhm.
switches and routers. The more you add into it, the more congested everything becomes. So Red Hat Satellite focuses on Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
I just like the car analogy. You wouldn't go to a Chevrolet dealership with a Ford and say, "Can you work on this car?" By the way, it's like it's a car.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
The nuance that they're not properly equipped or have the training and to be able to support it. It's the same way. We are well equipped to support RHEL and Red Hat products and the knowledge base. Other distributions, you know, it would be more of a, hey, we'll try our best, but this is not our specialty.
So Shantanu asks
Mhm.
kind of a paired question here. Does Satellite entertain hosting a container registry, something like PKG repos? And I thought we had a container registry. Maybe I'm thinking of Ansible Automation Platform.
So when Satellite 6.0 was first released, it could actually hold containers in OS tree. That has been deprecated for quite a version, 6.15, about to go on 6.16, pretty soon. So we haven't supported that feature set. Now we have Quay within Red Hat, and that is a container repository that we do sell and support. Um, but as I said, you know, Satellite's a great content management. They can hold a tarball. Would I do a registry without all the bells and whistles? I probably wouldn't. I probably want something, especially if you want in production.
Hmm.
So those are the things I would ask. If you're, it's one thing when you're tinkering versus I want to take this to production and my business depends on it.
Well, and there's so much nuance with container registries versus, say, package repos.
Yeah,
You've got tagging, you've got version numbers, you've
the
got
layering.
layering configuration files in it
Yeah,
in the container file itself. So satellite does not, and thank you for clarifying because even I'd forgotten that had been deprecated.
yeah.
But yeah, Quay would be your solution there, Shantanu.
And it's also included on OpenShift
Hmm.
container infrastructure. Quay is
Yep.
part baked in as well.
Yep. Yeah. So build a container registry within your OpenShift cluster.
Mhm.
So you had one other point you wanted to make. You've dubbed this model. You're calling the Red Hat Infrastructure Standardization Adoption Model. So why don't
Model.
you tell us a little bit about it?
So yeah, that's a mouthful. Say that
A little
fast.
bit.
That's because so you try. So the whole idea is, what is it going to take to have a infrastructure as code? We've been hearing that for years, right? And it sounds great, but then you go, well, what is it really going to take to do so? And what would be the advantage? Where are we going to achieve? And the whole idea is to have like an end-to-end, you know, life to death of your infrastructure, be able to deploy it, be able to have address any security challenges you have, be able to have a standard within your organization. The whole idea of being able to define your operating system, the applications that you run on them, the way you authenticate those applications, the way you automate. It really requires all these components. And some fellow Red Hatters, thinking of a certain Mike that I see every once in a while in our meetings, who basically, we did a presentation about this a few years back, in which to really have a standard adoption, you need to have certain components. You want to have a centralized authentication for your hosts, and so you can manage those IDs. You want to have a content management engine that you can control what you present to your host and build your host and patch your host, a way to orchestrate all those instances. And of course, we'll add Red Hat products to do so, but the concept is really all those components that you need. So as I mentioned those things, most people are thinking, okay, so he's talking about IDM for the authentication, central authentication for all the Linux systems that can authenticate and have access to services, mount points, capabilities, or elevated uh, uh, security profiles, or the ability to utilize satellite to put out there the updates and patches that need to take place. And in this case, would be Ansible automation for the orchestration of all of these things, for both the laydown of the OS, the patching, the maintenance, the rollback process, maybe even creating a snapshot of the host before you even attempt to patch the host. In case something goes wrong, you can roll that back. And if you've done this quite well, you have a nice workflow. You can begin from zero to full deployment and have different iterations of it. I have a full history of them, which helps also in the DR space. Uh, I used to say documentation. It's not real. Automation is not documentation. You just written all the scripts, but it is a good starting point for the documentation of your environment. What it is, how to use it, how to deploy it, how to update it. And it also gives you a good way of having a better visibility of your environment. And over the long term, by taking that approach, your ability to reduce the technical debt as years go by, and your ability to upgrade to a newer OS, it helps. Obviously, sometimes we're dictated what OS we run by the vendor or a specific application that has only been validated to run on a specific version of the OS that it's a few years old, and you've been pleading with your vendor, please, can you update it? We'll pay you. Please, just update the application so we can get off this particular version of the OS. So that is the approach that actually for years Red Hat has had that approach, but they coined the phrase of the Red Hat infrastructure standard adoption model. Boy, it's a mouthful. I just think of infrastructure as code and having a standardized approach and deployment. Yes, that's really at the end of the day what you want to do, and to be also be able to upgrade systems in a much easier fashion since you've automated the whole process of the building of such system. And I've been talking for a little while. Any thoughts, Eric?
No, I like it. I was getting caught up on chat. Apologies, but yeah, I
No
mean,
worries.
it's automation and documentation are huge pieces of a sysadmin's life, and the more time you spend on automating and making predictable configurations, the easier your life will be, and the more time you can spend, I don't know, hanging out with a couple of red hatters on a live stream.
When people ask me, so if you were to build your dream infrastructure, I would always say, well, yes, I would absolutely have a satellite server. I would absolutely have an IDM server. I would have an Ansible automation platform, AAP, and I would drive everything from the AAP server. Meaning
Yep.
the patching is going to happen from there. It's going to orchestrate it. And you might ask, like, why would you want to do that, Richard? I mean, you already have satellite. Yes, absolutely. But If I am patching production, I'm not just patching production. I'm usually going to be talking to the security team. I'm going to be talking to the networking team. I'm talking to the QA, to the dev team before we're making these changes during our maintenance window. I could have the orchestration tool to go ahead and talk to the, I don't know, load balancers to reduce traffic to the production, to this pilot group we're going to change, and then bring the services down, push the new code, validate the code's there, automate the whole QA process. So instead of taking 45 minutes to 2 hours, 20 minutes. Test is automated. At the end, you get a pass fail. And those maintenance window seems to have gained so much more time because you've automated all those steps that could take hours. That's when it gets really interesting.
So I can think of no place better to get that kind of inspiration and that kind of direction than our very own Red Hat YouTube channel, our own very own RHEL YouTube channel, I should say. So as we've pretty well exhausted the questions in chat, and we've run off our planned comments for this episode, as Scott would say, I really want to thank everybody for joining us in this mini series. Richard, thank you for giving up some of your very valuable time to come and hang out and talk about satellite, share your experience. This would not have been nearly as much fun if I did it by myself.
Thank you for the opportunity, man. I look for any opportunity to talk about satellite and RHEL and how we can make somebody's life better.
For sure. If you're new to our channel, definitely subscribe, hit the like button so we know that you like content like this. And of course, there's self-paced labs for all of this. And while this does bring us to the end of our Red Hat Satellite mini-series, I know that Satellite will continue to be a topic of conversation on RHEL Presents and as well as some of our other content. So definitely subscribe to our channel. I really appreciate your time on behalf of my guest star co-host Richard Rios. I've been Eric the IT guy Hendricks, and on behalf of the entire Red Hat Enterprise Linux team, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.